The morning rain tapped a steady rhythm against the high windows of Hermione Granger's study, the kind of soft, persistent drizzle that blurred the edges of London and wrapped the city in a quiet silver haze. She sat cross-legged on the worn rug, a stack of crumbling manuscripts fanned out before her like an unread prophecy. The scent of old parchment and chamomile teal curled through the air. Her fingers traced the spidery script of a 12th-century treatise on celestial transfiguration, her mind only half on the words. The war had been over for nearly 2 decades, but its echoes still hummed beneath the surface of her life, sometimes in the way her wand twitched in her pocket when thunder cracked, or how she still woke at precisely 3:17 a.m. with her heart pounding, though she could never remember the dream. A sharp rap at the door startled her. She rose, brushing dust from her robes, and opened it to find a ministry owl perched stiffly on the sill, its feathers slick with rain. Clutched in its talons was a sealed scroll wrapped in wax, the color of dried blood. The insignia, 2 serpents coiled around a chalice, sent a chill down her spine. The alchemical watch. She hadn't seen that seal since her post-war research into forbidden magic had been quietly, firmly shut down. "From the Department of Mysteries?" she asked, though the bird only blinked and dropped the scroll into her hand, before launching back into the mist. The note inside was brief, written in a clipped hand of Director Thorne, Star Hermione. Urgent matter. Bulgarian courier delivered fragmented text this morning. Formula matches descriptions of the Aurum Vinctus, prohibited under Treaty of Prague, 1812. We need your expertise. Come at once. Star. Her breath caught. Aurum Vinctus. The golden chain. A myth whispered in academic circles. A legend among alchemists, said to transmute not just base metals, but the very soul's essence. Used once, centuries ago, to bind a dark wizard's spirit to a living host. The experiment had ended in madness, fire, and a crater where a village once stood. She arrived at the ministry through the visitor's entrance, her ministry badge flashing briefly under the dame atrium lights. The halls were hushed, the usual bustle muffled, as though the building itself sensed the weight of what had arrived. Thorne met her at the edge of the restricted wing, his face grave. "It came in pieces," he said, guiding her down a narrow corridor lit by floating orbs of cold blue light, hidden in the binding of a psalter from the monastery of St. Neophytos. 3 fragments, one is nearly intact, the others charred but legible in parts. They stepped into a circular chamber lined with iron shelves and glass cases. In the center, under a dome of shimmering containment magic, lay the fragments on a velvet tray. Hermione approached slowly, her pulse thrumming in her throat. The script was archaic, older than any alchemical text she'd seen. Runes intertwined with symbols that seemed to shift when stared at too long, but there, beneath the flourishes and ciphers, the structure was unmistakable. A sequence of invocations, a list of reagents, dragon's breath resin, mood petal dew, the ash of a phoenix feather burned in silence, and a final incantation, half-scorched, but still bearing the phrase, "Star," to restore what was sundered. Star, her fingers hovered above the glass. "This isn't just about transmutation," she murmured. "It's about resurrection." Thorne nodded. "We think someone's trying to rebuild it, but who, and why now?" She looked up. "I'll go to Bulgaria," he blinked. "You're not field qualified for—" "I know ancient alchemical syntax better than anyone in this department, and if this formula is even partially functional, sending someone untrained could trigger a containment breach, or worse, complete the process." Silence stretched between them. Finally Thorne exhaled. "Then you won't go alone. We've already arranged a liaison. He'll meet you at Diagon Alley tomorrow morning. Viktor Krum." Hermione froze. The name settled over her like a forgotten spell, one that still held warmth, an ache, and the ghost of a promise never fulfilled. She hadn't seen him since the Yule Ball, not really. A few letters after the war, then silence. Life, as it often did, had carried them in different directions. "Viktor," she repeated softly. "He's been tracking strange magical disturbances in the Balkan highlands. Says the mountains have been singing at night." She looked back at the fragments, at the words that whispered of lost souls and second chances. "I'll be there," she said. Rain tapped a steady rhythm against the windowpane of Hermione Granger's study, the kind of persistent drizzle that clung to the rooftops of London like a damp shroud. She sat curled in her favorite armchair, a stack of charred parchment balanced on her knee, the remnants of a fire-damaged manuscript recovered from the ruins of an old apothecary in Diagon Alley. The ink was smudged, the Latin nearly illegible, but one phrase kept repeating, etched between the charring: star sanguis in aurum, os in spiritum star, blood into gold, bone into spirit. The words sent a cold ripple through her, not just for their alchemical weight, but for what they implied. This wasn't just transformation, it was transmutation of the soul. A soft pop announced an owl's arrival, wings slick with rain as it landed on the edge of her desk. It extended a leg bearing a ministry seal, Bulgarian, not British. Hermione untied the letter with careful fingers, dismissing the bird with a murmured thanks. The parchment crackled as she unfolded it, the script bold and angular. Star, dear Professor Granger, star, it began. Star in accordance with the International Magical Artifact Accord. The Bulgarian ministry requests your expertise in the examination of a recently uncovered manuscript, believed to contain references to the lost alchemical formula known as the elixir of Sokol. Given your prior contributions to magical research and your familiarity with certain unique historical contexts, your presence is deemed essential. You will be met upon arrival in Sofia by your liaison, Viktor Krum, who has been assigned to assist in your investigation. Star, the name struck her like a misplaced spell. Viktor Krum, she exhaled slowly, the breath fogging the cool glass of the window. It had been over a decade since she'd last seen him, since the Yule Ball, his quiet intensity beneath the grand chandeliers, the way he'd held her hand, as if afraid it might vanish. Then, after the war, a few letters exchanged in shaky script, condolences offered across a continent of grief. He'd lost family during the Death Eater purges in Eastern Europe. She'd lost so many, she could barely keep count. She hadn't thought of him in years, not truly, not since Ron had left, not since the silence had grown between them, thick and unyielding as stone. And now he was to be her partner. Hermione pressed her fingertips to her temples. This wasn't about the past. This was about magic. Dangerous, ancient magic. The kind that had lured men to ruin since the time of Nicholas Flamel. The elixir of Sokol wasn't merely legend. If the fragment she'd seen were any indication, it predated even the Philosopher's Stone, rooted in a branch of magic that blurred the line between creation and resurrection. But why Viktor? She knew his reputation. Auror, decorated, reclusive. He turned down offers from the International Confederation to return to Bulgaria to help rebuild the shattered remnants of their magical infrastructure. He'd become a guardian of sorts, of history, of secrets. Still, she remembered his eyes, dark and unreadable, the way he'd watched her across crowded rooms, as though she were a riddle he didn't want to solve too quickly. The way he'd kissed her once, beneath a sky full of falling stars, and then pulled away as if burned. A shiver passed through her, not from the cold. She stood, pacing the room, the letter still clutched in her hand. The rain had eased, leaving the city glistening under a bruised twilight. She thought of dragons, wild ones, older than memory, still nesting in the Rilla Mountains, of forgotten monasteries carved into cliffs, where monks once whispered spells into stone, of alchemists who sought not gold, but redemption, and now Viktor would walk beside her into that darkness. She swallowed hard. Old feelings were like old spells, best left undisturbed, but some magic refused to stay buried. Snow fell in soft, persistent waves over Sofia, dusting the cobbled streets and clinging to the eaves of old stone buildings. Hermione pulled her coat tighter around her, the chill seeping through wool and magic alike. The ministry-issued portkey had deposited her at the edge of the city just before dusk, and now she walked with brisk purpose, her boots clicking against the frost-laced pavement. Maps and coded messages had been studied for weeks, but nothing could prepare her for the quiet weight of returning to Bulgaria, the country where war had once echoed in whispers through the forests, and where a younger version of herself had laughed beneath a star-strewn sky. A faint scent of wood smoke curled through the air, mingling with the sharp tang of pine from nearby hills. Somewhere a church bell tolled, its resonance muffled by the snow. She turned down a narrow lane, lantern light casting long shadows across the frosts. Her breath came in pale clouds, each exhale a reminder of how much had changed. and how much had not. He was waiting outside a low, ivy-clad inn, his silhouette unmistakable even in the dim light. Viktor Krum stood motionless, hands tucked into the pockets of a heavy dark coat, his broad frame barely disturbed by the cold. His face was more lined than she remembered, shadows beneath his eyes speaking of long nights and heavier thoughts. But when he turned and saw her, something softened. A quiet recognition, like the first break in a frozen river. "Hermione," he said, voice low and steady. "You made it." She stopped a few paces away, suddenly aware of how fast her heart was beating. "Viktor, it's good to see you." He gave a small nod, then stepped forward, closing the distance. He didn't embrace her, not quite, but offered a hand, calloused warm. She took it, and for a moment, they simply stood there, snow settling on their shoulders. "You look tired," he said gently. "And you look like you haven't slept since the Triwizard Tournament," she replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. A rare chuckle escaped him. "Some things don't change. You still find trouble in books, and you still speak as if every word costs gold." They fell into step together, moving toward the inn's arched wooden door. Inside, the air was thick with warmth and the scent of roasted meat and spiced wine. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering light over the low tables and worn tapestries. Viktor led them to a corner booth, away from curious eyes. "I received your report," he said, lowering his voice. "The monastery near Rila, it wasn't on any registry, not even in the old Durmstrang archives." Hermione nodded, unwrapping her scarf. "That's what worries me. Someone erased it, or someone wanted it forgotten." He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. "And this formula, alchemical resurrection through harmonic transfiguration. You believe it's real?" "I believe someone thinks it is," she said, "and that's dangerous enough." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Viktor reached into his coat and slid a small leather-bound book across the table. The cover was scorched at one corner, the script faded. "I found this in the monastery's catacombs," he said. "Left behind, or planted. I don't know." Hermione's fingers hovered over it, hesitant. "You went alone?" "I waited," he said quietly. "But you were late, and the signs, they were already there. Cold stones, whispering walls." She looked up at him, something unspoken passing between them, regret, perhaps, or the weight of time lost. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner." He shook his head. "You're here now. That's what matters." She opened the book. The first page bore a single phrase in ancient runes. "Star. To remake life, one must first unmake the soul." Star. A shiver ran through her, not from the cold, but from the quiet certainty that they were already too close to something that should have stayed buried. Viktor reached for the fire poker, stoking the flames without looking away from her. "We climb tomorrow," he said. "Before dawn." She closed the book, pressing her palm against its worn cover. "Then we'd better get some rest." But neither of them moved. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in silence. And somewhere in the mountains beyond, stone doors stirred in their ancient frames. The fire in the hearth of the monastery's scriptorium crackled low, casting long trembling shadows across the stone walls. Hermione sat cross-legged on a threadbare rug. The scent of aged parchment and beeswax thick in the air. Before her, spread like a puzzle, no child could solve, lay the fragments of the manuscript. Burnt at the edges, some pages were no larger than a palm, their ink faded or smeared by time, and something darker, something that whispered of deliberate destruction. She adjusted her spectacles, fingers hovering just above the brittle paper, careful not to touch. "They used fire," she murmured, more to herself than to Viktor, who stood behind her, his silhouette tall and still against the flickering light. "But not ordinary fire. Look at the edges, curled inward, not charred. This was cursed flame, intent to obliterate, not just destroy." Viktor stepped forward, boots soft on the stone. He crouched beside her, his shoulder nearly brushing hers. Who would go to such lengths to hide alchemy? Not even the ministry bans it so fiercely. "Not alchemy," she corrected, voice lowering. "This is star prima materia star. Not just transformation of elements, but of essence. Life, death." She pointed to a symbol half-scorched in the corner of one fragment, a spiral wrapped around a serpent, drinking its own tail, but with a third eye at its center. This isn't in any text I've seen. Not Flamel's work, not Paracelsus. It predates them, and it speaks of resurrection. Viktor exhaled slowly. Resurrection. She glanced at him then, catching the storm in his eyes. He had lost so much: family, friends, parts of himself he never spoke of. The war had taken its toll on them all, but Viktor carried his like a mantle, worn and heavy. She had read it in his letters over the years, formal, courteous, always edged with distance. And now here they were, knee-deep in secrets that could unravel the natural order, and the silence between them was no longer empty, but full of things unsaid. "These fragments," she said, turning back to the pages, "they're not random. See how the margins align? This one," she lifted a sliver of parchment, "has a watermark, a mountain range, barely visible. And this one," she shifted it beside another, "bears a notation in Old Church Slavonic, above the breath of the earth, where stone remembers sorrow." Viktor leaned closer. "The Rila Mountains. That's where my grandmother used to speak of. Places where the wind carries voices. She said the mountains were alive, that they held memories in their roots." Hermione stilled. Memories, not just echoes. Star, held star them. She traced the Slavic script with her fingertip. "This isn't just a location. It's a warning, or an invitation." Outside, the wind howled through the high monastery windows, rattling the frames. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf cried, a long, mournful note that faded into the night. The fire dipped, plunging the room into near darkness before flaring again, as if resisting the cold. "We should wait," Viktor said quietly, "until morning, until we understand more." She shook her head. "Every hour we delay, someone else could be searching. The ministry's not the only one interested in this. I've seen the reports. Missing scholars, vanished texts. If this formula falls into the wrong hands—" She didn't finish. They both knew what resurrection without balance could do. It wasn't life it promised. It was imitation. Corruption. Viktor studied her, the firelight catching the silver at his temples, the deep lines beside his eyes. "You haven't changed, Hermione. Still running toward danger like it owes you answers." She smiled faintly. "And you still speak as if silence can protect you." He looked away, but not before she saw the ghost of a smile touch his lips. After a moment, he reached into his coat and withdrew a small, leather-bound journal. His own notes, she realized. Pages filled with cramped Cyrillic script and sketches of runes. "There's a pass," he said, opening it. "Between two peaks. Locals call it Star Dyavolhof. Most Star, the Devil's Bridge. My grandmother said no bird flies over it at night. And the snow never melts, even in summer." Hermione leaned in, heart quickening. "That's it. The manuscript mentions a bridge, where the sky weeps and time forgets. It's not metaphorical. It's a place." They sat in silence then, the weight of what they'd uncovered pressing down like the mountain itself. The fragments were broken, yes, but together they were beginning to speak, and their voice led north, into the ice, into the dark, into the heart of a truth neither of them could yet bear to name. The air in the monastery of St. Cyril hung thick with the scent of old parchment, beeswax, and something fainter, ozone perhaps, with a lingering trace of long-decayed spells. Hermione stepped carefully across the stone floor, her boots muffled by centuries of woven rugs dyed in deep russet and indigo. Shelves rose like ancient trees around her, their dark wood carved with Cyrillic runes that pulsed faintly in the candlelight. This was no ordinary library. It breathed. She paused before a narrow alcove, her fingers tracing the spine of a crumbling grimoire titled Star, De Metallorum Anima Star. The title meant nothing to her at first, until it didn't. A tremor ran through the shelf. One book slid forward slightly, then another. The grimoire in her hand grew warm. "Interesting," she murmured. A whisper brushed her ear, not a voice, but a sensation, like the rustle of pages turned by an unseen hand. The book opened on its own. Pages fluttered, then stilled. In the margin beside a dense passage on transmutation matrices, a line of text shimmered into view. A script she didn't recognize, yet somehow understood. "Star, the formula is not creation, it is memory." Star. Hermione exhaled sharply. She reached for her satchel, pulling out a charmed quill and notebook. But before she could transcribe the words, the ink shifted. The sentence reformed. She remembers what others have forgotten. Star. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't just a library. It was sentient, a repository not only of books, but of thought, of echoes. And it knew her. Hermione? Victor's voice came from the archway, low and cautious. He stood silhouetted in the dim glow, his broad frame filling the space. "You found something?" She turned, holding up the book. "It's responding to me. I don't know why. I didn't cast anything." He stepped closer, his boots echoing now. "The monk said, this place chooses who it speaks to. Only those with unfinished questions." She looked at him, then back at the page. "It called me star, she's star. Not star, you star. Not star, you star. Like it knows me from somewhere." The book trembled again. More text bloomed in the margins, faster now, like thoughts spilling over. Star, the fire and the blood, the stone that weeps, the one who walked through time and returned changed. Star. Hermione's breath caught. Her hand instinctively went to the small, faded scar on her wrist, the one from the time-turner incident in her 3rd year. Impossible. That was private. Forgotten, even by most who knew her. "It knows about the time-turner," she whispered. "It knows about Star me star," thought her. Victor leaned in, his shoulder grazing hers. "Maybe it's not the book. Maybe it's the formula. Maybe it's connected to you somehow." She shook her head slowly. "I've never seen it before. Not in any text, not in any archive. How could it?" Another ripple. The page shifted again. This time the handwriting changed. Neater, sharper, English. "Star, you sought knowledge to save a friend. You would do it again. That is why you are here." Star tears pricked her eyes. It was speaking of Harry, of Sirius, of all the nights she'd stayed awake, poring over books, desperate to undo death. "I didn't come here to change the past," she said, her voice thick. "Star." "No, Star," the page replied. "Star. But you still carry it, and so does the formula." Star. Victor placed a hand gently on her arm. "This place, it sees more than books. It sees hearts." She closed her eyes. For a moment, she was back in the Department of Mysteries, the air humming with shattered prophecy. Back in the forest, clutching the broken time-turner, sobbing into the silence. When she opened them, the book had turned to a new page. A diagram emerged, 12 interlocking circles, each inscribed with alchemical symbols. At the center, a single word formed in glowing script. "Star, eternum, sir." "The eternal," Victor breathed. "Not immortality, continuity." "The cycle," Hermione traced the word with her finger. "It's not about making gold, or even life. It's about memory, preservation, not of the body, but of the soul." The library sighed around them, candles flickered. Somewhere a page turned, and she understood with a quiet certainty that settled deep in her bones. This was not a weapon, not a prize. It was a warning, and it had been waiting for her. The wind howled through the narrow pass like a chorus of forgotten spirits, tugging at Hermione's cloak and sending loose pebbles skittering down the sheer drop to their left. She pulled the wool tighter around her shoulders, her breath puffing in quick white clouds as she adjusted the strap of her satchel. Snow dusted the ground in uneven patches, lingering in the shadows even as the sun climbed the pale morning sky. Behind her, boots crunching on frost-laden stone, Victor followed without a word. His presence was solid, steady, like the mountains themselves. She didn't need to look back to know he was scanning the ridgelines, his dark eyes missing nothing. They had left the monastery under cover of pre-dawn gray, slipping through the ancient iron gate, with nothing but packs, wands, and a scrap of parchment, written in a cipher that had taken Hermione 3 sleepless nights to crack. The formula itself was still a mystery, more myth than substance, but the urgency in the letter from the Bulgarian ministry had been clear. It must not fall into the wrong hands. "You are our only hope." Star. Hermione tightened her grip on her wand, tucked into the inner pocket of her cloak. She hadn't expected to return to this part of the world under such circumstances. Not with him. A gust tore through the pass, and she flinched as something shifted high above. Just a shadow, really, with a play of cloud and stone, but Victor stopped short, his hand rising slightly, a silent command to halt. She froze, ears straining. Then she heard it, a low rhythmic thrumming, like wings too large for any bird. "Dragon," he murmured, voice barely above the wind. She swallowed. "Juvenile, I hope." He gave a humorless half-smile. "Hope does not change scales, Hermione, but we are not on their nesting grounds. Likely a scout. They remember intruders." She nodded, heart thudding. The thought of facing a dragon, again, so soon after the war, after all they'd lost, it clawed at old wounds. But this was different. This wasn't chaos, wasn't blood and fire. This was purpose. They pressed on, choosing a path along the cliff's edge, where the stone was less treacherous. The alchemical formula, if real, was said to originate from a temple buried beneath the highest peak. Star, Zumaj is Ma Star. The locals called it. A place woven through with old magic and older warnings. It was said the temple had been built by a sect of alchemists, who sought to transmute not metal, but life itself. To heal death, to conquer time, and that, Hermione thought, was exactly why it had been buried. A sharp crack echoed behind them. She turned. A rock slide. No, the snow near the path's edge had shifted, and between the boulders something glinted, metallic, deliberate. "Trap," Viktor said quietly. "Or marker." She crouched, wand drawn, and whispered, "Star hominum revelio, star." The air shimmered faintly, 2 faint blue trails leading off the main path, veering east. "Watchers. We're not alone," she said. Viktor's jaw tightened. "I know. Do you think it's the Order of the Ashing Flame?" she asked, aiming the shadowy group rumored to traffic in forbidden magic. "Or someone who wants us to think it is," he replied. "Be ready. They may not want the formula. They may only want us gone." They moved faster then, climbing higher, the air thinning with every step. Hermione's muscles burned, her mind racing through possible enchantments, defensive spells, escape routes. But beneath the fear, beneath the vigilance, there was something else, a quiet thrill, the same one that had drawn her to books as a girl, to mysteries no one else dared touch. And then, Viktor reached out, just briefly, and steadied her elbow as she stepped over a crumbling ledge. "Careful," he said. She looked up at him, startled by the warmth in his voice. His eyes, sharp and guarded only moments before, held something softer, something like remembrance. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, and they continued, the mountain rising before them like a sleeping giant. Somewhere above, in the teeth of the storm-racked peak, the temple waited, and with it, the truth. But beneath their feet, the stones trembled, just once, as if the mountain itself had taken a breath. The wind howled through the jagged peaks like a chorus of forgotten spirits, biting through Hermione's cloak as she stepped carefully over a snow-crusted stone threshold. The monastery loomed above her, its once proud towers now bowed beneath centuries of ice and silence. Cracked arches framed the bruised twilight sky, and ivy, blackened by frost, clung to the walls like veins. She pulled her scarf tighter, breath forming ghostly clouds in the thin air. Beside her, Viktor adjusted the strap of his satchel, his dark eyes scanning the ruin with quiet intensity. "This place," he said, voice low, "it was not on any map I knew as a boy. My grandfather spoke of it once, only once, in a story he swore was not meant for children." Hermione glanced at him. "What kind of story?" He hesitated. "Of men who sought to turn sorrow into gold, not the metal, something else. Something they called the heart's alchemy." She frowned, turning back to the broken gate. "That sounds dangerously close to what we're looking for." They stepped forward, boots crunching on frozen gravel. The air smelled of damp stone and something older, ozone, and dried herbs, perhaps, or the faint, metallic tang of old magic. Hermione lit her wand, the soft blue glow cutting through the gathering dark. Shadows danced across the courtyard, revealing shattered statues of robed figures, their faces worn smooth by time. This was no ordinary monastery, she murmured, crouching to brush snow from a carved stone slab. The symbols beneath were faint but familiar, a blend of alchemical sigils and runes from the early Slavic magical tradition. They weren't just preserving manuscripts, they were experimenting, in secret. Viktor nodded toward a collapsed wing, and whatever they did, it ended badly. She stood, brushing snow from her gloves. Or they were interrupted. They moved deeper into the complex, following a covered walkway, half buried under avalanche debris. Inside the main hall, the roof had caved in long ago, and moonlight now poured through the wreckage, illuminating a massive stone altar at the far end. It was cracked down the middle, but the carvings along its base remained intact, serpents swallowing their own tails, moons, eclipsing suns, and a single phrase etched in archaic Greek: star, from ash truth, from truth fire, from fire return. Star. Hermione traced the words with her fingertips. This is part of the formula. Not the ingredient list, but the philosophy behind it, the intention. Viktor stepped beside her. You think they believe this alchemy could bring back what was lost? I think, she said softly. They were trying to heal something. A wound personal, maybe even national. After the last great war with the dark alchemists, many lost everything. A gust of wind whistled through the broken rafters, and for a moment the shadows seemed to shift. Hermione turned sharply, wand raised. Did you hear that? He went still. Footsteps. No. Like pages turning, but there are no books here. They exchanged a glance and moved toward a narrow doorway to the left of the altar. Behind it, a spiral staircase descended into darkness. The air grew warmer as they descended, unnaturally so, and the scent of old parchment returned, stronger now. At the bottom, they found a hidden scriptorium, intact, untouched. Shelves lined the walls filled with leather-bound tomes and scrolls sealed with wax. In the center of the room stood a wooden table, and on it, open to a page marked with a dried sprig of mountain thyme, lay a journal. Hermione approached slowly, heart pounding. The handwriting was spidery, but precise. She read aloud, Star. We have split the soul's essence, believing we could mend it. But the formula demands balance. Grief for gold, memory for power. To use it fully is to invite the opposite. To turn gold to grief, and memory to ash. Star. Viktor exhaled. They were trying to resurrect the dead. She closed the journal gently. No, not the dead. The star, lost star. There's a difference. There's a difference. Outside, the wind rose to a scream. Somewhere above, a stone shifted and crashed. They were not alone, and whatever had guarded this place for centuries, it knew they had found the first truth. The air in the chamber was thick with the scent of damp stone and something older, burnt parchment maybe, or dried herbs left to molder in a forgotten drawer. Hermione pressed her palm against the rough wall, feeling the faint tremor of ancient magic beneath her fingertips. The runes they'd found near the entrance had been nearly erased by time, but she'd managed to translate enough to know they were a warning, not to enter, not to seek, not to remember. Viktor stood a few paces behind, his silhouette tall and still against the dim blue glow of the Lumos charm hovering above his wand. He hadn't spoken since they'd crossed the threshold, and she didn't blame him. This place had silence woven into its bones. This was no monastery, she murmured, more to herself than to him. Not really, it was a tomb, a library, a prison. He stepped forward, his boots scraping softly against the uneven floor. You think he lived here? Not lived, she said, tracing a shallow groove in the stone. Imprisoned, or hiding, maybe both. She pulled a small vial from her satchel. Dragon's breath, infused with moonwater, unstable but effective. With careful precision, she flicked a drop onto the wall. For a moment, nothing. Then the stone began to weep. Invisible ink, ghost ink, the ancients called it, began to bloom across the surface, like veins of silver fire. Lines spiraled outward, forming words in a script Hermione had only seen in fragmented scrolls from the pre-Ottoman era. Her breath caught. They're warnings, she whispered, eyes scanning the emerging text. Not just against entering, against remembering, against star knowing star. Viktor moved closer, his shoulder brushing hers as he leaned in to read. He knew someone would come. He star expected star it, she corrected. Look, this part, to the seeker who follows the path of ash and starlight, turn back. What I have written cannot be unlearned. What I have made cannot be undone. A chill curled through the chamber, though there was no draught. The lumos flickered, as if reacting to the rising magic in the air. Hermione reached out, not quite touching the words. He wasn't just an alchemist. He was trying to rewrite life itself. Not transmutation of metals, of star souls, hermasos. He believed he could repair what was broken, restore what was lost. Her voice softened. Like bringing back the dead. Viktor went very still. Like Harry. She turned to him, startled. He rarely spoke his friend's name, not even after all these years. The war had taken too much from him, from both of them. I don't think he meant Harry, she said gently. I think he meant Star dead, his wife, his children, the ones who died in the plague of 38. He called them his star, unfinished symphony star, Fins. The ink continued to spread, revealing sketches now, crude, trembling drawings of a stone cradle, a locket, a face half erased by time. Beneath them, a single phrase repeated like a prayer. Star. I only wanted to hear her laugh again. Star. Hermione felt something crack inside her chest. She thought of her parents in Australia, of the years erased from their minds, of the choice she'd made and would make again, but still she dreamed of restoring what she'd taken. Viktor reached out, his finger hovering over one of the drawings. He failed, didn't he? She nodded. The last entry, it says, the formula works, but not as I intended. It does not bring back the soul. It creates a shadow that remembers how to wear one. She swallowed. He didn't resurrect his wife. He made a creature that wore her voice like a stolen coat. A long silence settled between them, broken only by the soft drip of water from the ceiling. Finally, Viktor said, and the formula, it's still here, isn't it? Hermione closed her eyes. Yes, and someone's already been looking for it. The wind howled through the cracked stone archways of the monastery, like a spirit unwilling to rest. Snow swirled in eddies across the courtyard, catching in Hermione's dark cloak as she stepped inside the dimly lit scriptorium. The scent of aged parchment, beeswax, and something faintly metallic, like old blood or iron filings, hummed thick in the air. Torches flickered along the stone walls, casting long, wavering shadows over shelves crammed with crumbling scrolls, leather-bound tomes and glass vials, filled with powders of indeterminate origin. Viktor followed close behind, his tall frame hunched slightly beneath the low ceiling. He said nothing, but she felt the weight of his presence, steady, watchful. They had not spoken much since crossing the mountain pass, not since the avalanche had nearly buried them alive, and he pulled her from the snow with hands that trembled only slightly. There was something unspoken between them now, a thread pulled taut by near death and the memory of younger years. An old man sat hunched over a reading stand, his fingers tracing the faded ink of an open manuscript. His robes were threadbare, patched at the elbows, and his white beard fell nearly to his waist. One milky eye turned toward them as they approached. The other remained fixed on some distant point, unseeing. "You've come for the formula," he said, not a question. Hermione exchanged a glance with Viktor before stepping forward. "We've come to understand it," she corrected gently, "if it's real." The old man, Brother Lazar, they had been told, let out a breath that sounded like dry leaves scattering. Real? Yes, too real. It breathes, that formula. It dreams. It remembers. She frowned. "What do you mean it remembers?" He lifted a gnarled hand, pointing to a series of symbols etched into the margin of the manuscript. Symbols she had never seen before, angular and pulsing faintly beneath the torchlight, as if responding to his touch. "These are not merely instructions, they are a summoning, a covenant. The alchemist who wrote this, Master Orlov, did not create the formula. He unearthed it, from beneath the mountain, from the tomb of the first flame." Viktor shifted, his voice low. "The first flame?" "A myth," Hermione said quickly. "An old legend about the first dragon, said to have forged life from fire and ash. It's not." "Not real," Lazar interrupted, his blind eye somehow still piercing. "You speak of truth like a child speaks of fire, only from what others have told you. Orlov believed, and when he tried to complete the formula, the mountain swallowed him." A silence settled over the room, broken only by the crackle of torches and the distant moan of wind. Hermione wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold, but from the sudden press of something ancient and watching. "What was the formula meant to do?" she asked, voice softer now. Lazar closed the manuscript slowly, his fingers laboring on the cover. to transmute sorrow into light, to resurrect what was lost, not in flesh, but in essence, love, memory, the soul's echo. But such power demands a price. Orlov offered his own heart, the mountain took the rest. She swallowed. "And you believe this is possible?" "I do not believe," he whispered. "I remember. I was his apprentice. I watched him vanish into the flame." Viktor stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "Then you know how to stop it. If someone tries again." Lazar's good eye fixed on him. "I know only this. Love is not meant to be forged in fire. It is meant to live, to fade, to return in its own time. To force it is to invite ruin." Hermione looked down at her hands, thinking of Ron, of war, of nights spent whispering names into the dark. Was that what this was? A way to bring back what was gone? But Viktor's gaze held hers, steady, present, alive. And in that moment, she wondered if the real alchemy wasn't in formulas or fire, but in choosing to stay, to face the past without trying to reshape it. The mountain pass narrowed into a jagged cleft, its walls slick with frost and ancient runes carved deep into the stone. Moonlight, thin and silver, spilled over the ridge above, casting long shadows that seemed to twist with motion of their own. Hermione pulled her cloak tighter, the cold biting through layers of wool and enchantment. She glanced at Viktor, who moved ahead with the quiet assurance of someone who knew these peaks like the lines on his palm. His breath curled in pale wisps, and his eyes, dark and watchful, scanned the path with a hunter's focus. "We're close," he murmured, his voice low, barely above the wind. "The monastery ruins lie just beyond the next ridge." Hermione nodded, clutching her satchel where the brittle scroll containing the alchemical formula rested. It had taken weeks to decipher the first fragments, and even now the symbols resisted translation, as if the ink itself resisted understanding. But something about it called to her, not just intellectually, but in a deeper, almost primal way, like a song half remembered. Then the air changed. A hush fell, sudden and unnatural. The wind died. Even the distant cry of a mountain eagle ceased. Hermione froze. "Viktor," he turned, raising a hand. From the shadows along the cliff edge, figures emerged, silent, cloaked in black robes that seemed to drink the moonlight. Their faces were hidden, but their wands were drawn, glowing faintly with restrained power. 6, then 8, moving in unison, forming a half-circle that blocked the path forward and cut off retreat. "This is not a negotiation," one of them spoke, voice distorted, as if spoken through water. "The formula belongs to the Order of the Ashen Veil. Stand aside, and you live." Hermione stepped forward, wand aloft. "The formula is not yours to claim. It's dangerous, unstable. You have no idea what you're dealing with." The figure laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "We know more than you, my blood." The insult stung, but not as much as the curse that followed. A jet of violet light, fast and silent. Hermione dueled aside, rolling over the icy stone as the spell struck the wall behind her, leaving a crackling scar of blackened stone. She fired back, star protego star, and the shield flared to life, just as another curse slammed into it. The impact shuddered through her bones. Then Viktor moved. He didn't cast a spell. Not at first. Instead, he crouched low, one hand pressing against the frozen earth. His lips moved in a language Hermione didn't recognize, guttural, ancient syllables that seemed to vibrate in the air like the tolling of a buried bell. The ground trembled. From beneath the ice, runes glowing gold and deep blue flared to life in a wide circle around them. The air shimmered, and suddenly the attacker's spells bent mid-flight, deflected as if by an invisible dome. Hermione stared. "That's not wand magic." Viktor didn't look at her. "No. This is older." He spoke again, and this time the mountains answered. Shards of ice shot upward like spears, impaling one of the attackers mid-lunge. Another screamed as a fissure opened beneath him, swallowing him into darkness. The remaining figures faltered, their formation breaking. But they weren't done. 3 raised their wands in unison, chanting in a harsh, synchronized rhythm. A sphere of black fire formed between them, growing, pulsing with malevolent energy. Hermione recognized the spell, Star Ignis Umbrae Star. A forbidden curse that consumed not just flesh, but memory, identity. She raised her wand, ready to counter, when Viktor stepped in front of her. "No," he said, and then he sang, a single, clear note, rising into the night. It wasn't loud, but it carried a sound like wind over stone, like water finding its way through cracks in the earth. The black fire stuttered. The runes beneath their feet blazed brighter, and from the sky, a shadow, vast and beating, swept down. A dragon. Not a real one, not entirely. It was made of light and wind, formed from the magic Viktor had awakened in the stone. Its wings spanned the pass, and its roar was the sound of an avalanche. The attackers scattered, the dragon dove, not to kill, but to drive, blasting them with gales of enchanted air, sending them tumbling into the dark ravines below. When silence returned, the dragon dissolved into a shower of golden sparks. Hermione stood frozen, heart pounding. Viktor turned to her, breathing heavily. A thin line of blood traced his temple. "I did not want you to see that," he said quietly. "Not like this." She stepped forward, eyes wide. "What was that?" "A protection," he said. "My family. We were not only seekers of knowledge, we were guardians. This mountain, these ruins, they are ours to protect. And now, so are you." She stared at him, the cold forgotten, the danger still echoing in her bones. And for the first time she wondered if the greatest mystery wasn't the formula at all, but the man standing beside her. The air thinned as they climbed, each step crunching on frost-laced stone, the wind carrying whispers through the skeletal pines above. Below, the valley lay shrouded in silver mist, but ahead the jagged spine of the Smay Ridge cut into the sky like a row of broken teeth. Viktor adjusted the strap of his satchel, his breath forming brief clouds that vanished into the cold. "We should not be here," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "Not without permission." Hermione tightened her scarf, her fingers brushing a small obsidian compass tucked into her coat. It pulsed faintly, warm against her palm, its needle spinning in erratic circles before settling, pointing not north, but deeper into the mountain. "The compass doesn't lie," she said. "The formula's resonance is strongest here. The monastery's records mention the Zmei Pass, where fire sleeps beneath stone. This has to be it." Viktor glanced at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "Fire sleeps, yes, but it dreams. The dreams of dragons are not kind." They had left the last village at dawn, winding through goat trails that vanished under fresh snow. The reserve was uncharted on most maps, a forgotten stretch of land protected by ancient wards and older silence. Only a few knew it existed, fewer still dared enter. But the alchemical formula, whispered in crumbling scrolls and half-remembered incantations, demanded more than knowledge. It demanded passage through places untouched by time. The ground began to tremble, softly at first, like the distant beat of a drum. Hermione froze, her hand flying to her wand. The tremor ceased as quickly as it came, but the air thickened, humming with energy. Tiny crystals along the rock face began to glow, faint blue veins pulsing beneath the surface. "This isn't natural," she murmured. "It's responding to something. To star star." "You see," Viktor corrected, stepping closer. He unslung his staff, an heirloom from his grandfather, carved with runes that shimmered when danger neared. "The mountain knows we're seekers. It tests." Before she could answer, a deep, resonant call echoed from the cliffs above, a sound that was neither bird nor beast, but something older. The wind stilled. Even the snow seemed to hang in the air. Then, from the fog, an eye opened. Enormous, molten gold, it blinked once, slowly like a god surveying mortals. Wings, vast and leathery, unfurled from the mist, catching the weak sunlight in iridescent ripples. The dragon lowered its head, nostrils flaring as it scented the air. Its scales were not black, nor green, but a deep, shifting indigo, like storm clouds over the Black Sea. Hermione's breath caught. She had read of the Smay, ancient guardians bred from starlight and volcanic ash, bound not to hoard gold, but to protect knowledge. They were said to speak in riddles, to bar entry to the unworthy. Viktor stepped forward, slowly, hands open. He spoke then, not in English, but in an old Slavic tongue, words heavy with rhythm and respect. The dragon exhaled, a warm gust carrying the scent of sulphur and pine. It lowered its great head, eye narrowing. Then, to Hermione's astonishment, its star-knotted, A path of stone cracked open beneath their feet, revealing a staircase spiraling down into the mountain. The air that rose was warm, rich with the scent of moss and something metallic, like heated iron or blood. Viktor turned to her. "It allows passage, but only one question may be asked. Choose wisely." Hermione swallowed. The formula could rewrite life itself, restore what was lost, mend broken bodies, even bring back the dead, according to legend. But at what cost? She thought of Harry's scars, of Ginny's quiet grief, of her own sleepless nights, haunted by Bellatrix's laugh. She looked down the dark stair. "I need to know," she whispered, "whether this formula was meant to heal or to conquer." Viktor studied her, then gave a small nod. "Then that is the question we take with us." And together they stepped into the mountain's breath. The fire crackled low between them, a small defiance against the vast star-strewn dark of the Rhoda Mountains. Snow dusted the hem of Hermione's cloak, and the wind carried whispers through the pines, brittle and cold. Viktor sat with his back against a moss-covered boulder, one knee drawn up, his breath visible in the dim light. He had added a few sprigs of mountain thyme to the flames, and the scent, sharp, earthy, wound through the air like a memory. Hermione stirred the fire with a stick, watching embers spiral upward, like tiny stars fleeing the earth. She had been quiet since they'd made camp, her thoughts tangled in runes and riddles from the monastery's crumbling texts. The alchemical formula still eluded her, fragments of old magic, half erased by time and deliberate concealment. "You think too loud," Viktor said at last, his voice low, accented, familiar in a way that surprised her. She looked up, startled. "I wasn't aware thinking made noise." He offered a small smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes but warmed them anyway. "To me it does, like pages turning in a book no one else can read." She exhaled, a soft laugh catching in her throat. "That's oddly poetic." "Not poetry," he said, shifting slightly. "Just truth." A pause settled, but it wasn't heavy. It felt like space, room to breathe, to speak or not to. "I used to lie awake at Durmstrang," he said, gazing into the flames. "Not from fear, from silence. The silence there, it was thick, like wool over the ears. No stories, no songs, only drills and discipline." Hermione wrapped her hands around her mug of tea, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. "Hogwarts was loud, too loud sometimes. But I never minded. The portraits shouted, the staircases argued. My friends never stopped talking." "Ron," Viktor said, and there was no bitterness in it, only recognition. She nodded. "Yes, Ron. And Harry. They were my noise." "My anchor." Another silence, but this one held history. She could feel the weight of what had passed, the war, the losses, the years that had stretched between them like a forgotten bridge. "And now?" he asked. "What anchors you?" She considered. "Curiosity, I suppose. The need to understand, to fix what's broken." He studied her. "Even when it leads into mountains no one returns from, especially then." A spark leapt from the fire, and he caught it in his palm before it could land on his cloak. "My father taught me that fire remembers, that every flame carries echoes of the ones before it. He said, that's why we tell stories by them, to give the fire something to carry forward." Hermione tilted her head. "That's beautiful." "It is Bulgarian," he said simply. She smiled. "I suppose it is." The wind sighed through the trees again, and for a moment, the darkness beyond the firelight felt alive, watchful. But she didn't flinch. She had faced worse than shadows. "My mother used to tell me stories," she said, surprising herself, "about witches who walked the northern lights, who could mend time with a song. I thought they were just fairy tales. Now, I wonder. Maybe they weren't," he said. "Maybe some magic just waits to be remembered." She looked at him then, not as the famous seeker or the quiet man he had become, but as someone who had also carried loss, who had also learned to walk through silence. "I used to think I had to carry everything alone," she admitted. "That if I stopped, if I let someone in, I'd lose focus, or worse, put them in danger. And now," she met his gaze, "now I think, maybe I was wrong." The fire popped, and the light danced across his face, lines of wear, of weather, of years that had shaped him. He didn't look away. "We should sleep," he said, though he didn't move. "Long walk tomorrow." She nodded, but neither of them reached for their blankets. Instead, Viktor leaned forward and added another log to the fire. "Let it burn a little longer," he said. "Stories aren't meant to be rushed." And in the quiet, with the stars above and the mountains holding their breath, Hermione felt something shift, not suddenly, not dramatically, but like a door opening slowly, on well-oiled hinges. She didn't close it. The wind howled through Fangtooth Gorge, like a chorus of restless spirits, clawing at Hermione's cloak and whipping strands of brown hair across her face. She pulled her scarf tighter, eyes narrowed against the stinging grit carried on the gale. Before them, the path split, two narrow stone bridges, each arching over a chasm so deep the bottom vanished into mist and shadow. The bridges were ancient, their edges crumbling, runes etched into the supports flickering with unstable magic. "This way," Viktor said, his voice low and steady over the wind. He pointed to the left bridge, where the runes pulsed a dull amber. "The magic is older, but still alive." Hermione studied the right bridge. Its runes glowed a sharper blue, more vibrant, but pulsing erratically. "That one's been recently tampered with," she murmured. "Someone tried to strengthen it, but the enchantment's fraying. One wrong step, and it'll collapse." Viktor glanced at her, a flicker of respect in his dark eyes. "You seem older than most." She gave a small, tight smile. Years of dealing with unstable spell work tend to sharpen the senses. They stepped onto the left bridge, boots scraping against worn stone. The wind screamed around them, and the bridge swayed slightly under their weight. Hermione kept her hand on her wand, whispering a quiet stabilization charm under her breath. The runes responded, flaring amber for a moment before settling. Halfway across, the bridge shuddered. Hermione froze. "Don't move." Viktor stopped, breathe, visible in the cold air. Below, something stirred in the mist. A low, guttural growl, vibrating up through the stone. "Dragon spawn?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Worse," she replied. "Chasm worms, blind. But they feel vibrations. One footstep in a wrong place." She didn't finish. They both knew the stories. Creatures born from forgotten alchemical experiments. Half magic, half matter, drawn to movement and sound. Hermione closed her eyes, focusing. "We need to cross in perfect rhythm. No hesitation, no extra weight on any one stone. I'll go first. Watch my steps." She took a slow, deliberate step forward, then another. The bridge groaned softly but held. Viktor followed, mirroring her movements with the precision of an athlete. Step, pause, step. Their breaths fell into sync, the only sound besides the wind. Midway again, a stone cracked beneath Viktor's boot. The worms shrieked. The bridge trembled. Hermione's heart lurched. "Don't stop." They moved faster now, the rhythm breaking, each step a gamble. Another crack, another shriek. The stone beneath Viktor gave way, just slightly, sending him lurching forward. Hermione reacted without thinking. She spun, grabbed his arm, and pulled him toward her, both of them stumbling onto a wider, more stable arch. The broken stone plummeted into the abyss, swallowed by mist. For a breath, they stood pressed together, chests heaving, Viktor's hand still gripping her shoulder. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "You would have done the same," she replied, though her voice trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper, something she hadn't let herself feel in years. He looked at her then, really looked. At the smudge of dirt on her cheek, the determined set of her jaw, the quiet fire behind her eyes. I would." They crossed the final stretch in silence, the worms' cries fading behind them. When they reached solid ground, Hermione sank to her knees, not from exhaustion, but relief. Viktor offered her a canteen. She took it, their fingers brushing. "The formula," she said after a moment, voice steadier now. "It wasn't meant to create life. It was meant to mend it. To heal what war broke." He nodded slowly. "And we are not so different, are we?" She met his gaze, and in that moment the wind stilled, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Something passed between them, not just trust, but understanding. The fragile growing thing forged in danger and silence. They stood side by side and moved deeper into the gorge. The air in the cavern was thick with the scent of damp stone, and something older, something metallic, like rusted iron or dried blood. Hermione's torch flickered against the curved walls, casting long shadows that danced like specters across the ancient runes carved into the rock. Her fingers traced the symbols absently, murmuring translations under her breath. Guardian of the threshold. Blood to open, breath to seal. She exhaled, her breath visible in the sudden chill. It's real. Viktor stood a few paces behind, his broad frame silhouetted in the dim light. He'd been quiet since they'd crossed the frozen pass, his usual stoicism deepened by the weight of the journey. Now he shifted, his heavy boots crunching on frost-covered stone. You're certain this is it? Almost. Hermione stepped forward, placing her palm against a smooth section of wall where the runes converged. The stone hummed faintly beneath her touch, a vibration like a sleeping heart. She closed her eyes, focusing. There's a resonance, like a counterspell, embedded in the structure. It's not just protection, it's a lock, and it responds to intent. She withdrew her wand, murmuring a series of incantations in a dialect of Aramaic she'd only recently relearned from a crumbling grimoire found in the monastery's sub-cellar. The runes flared a dull crimson, then faded. Nothing happened. Viktor frowned. Maybe it needs more, or less, she said softly. She lowered her wand, took a deep breath, and pressed her bare palm to the stone again. This time she didn't cast. She simply thought of why they were here, of the lives that might be saved or ruined by what they found, of the quiet grief that had driven her back to magic after years of bureaucratic ministry work. A tear slipped free, tracing a cold path down her cheek, and fell onto the stone. The wall trembled. With a deep, groaning sigh, the rock split down the center, sliding inward with a sound like stone grinding against stone. Beyond lay a chamber, low-ceilinged and circular, its floor tiled in black and silver. In the center stood a pedestal, and on it, a single leather-bound book, its pages yellowed and cracked with age. Hermione stepped inside, her breath catching. Merlin. Viktor followed, his breath loud in the stillness. That's not possible. It wasn't the book that stunned them, but the sketches pinned beneath glass along the chamber's walls, dozens of them, drawn in fine ink and labeled in a script that predated even the earliest known alchemical texts. Each showed variations of the same formula: serpents entwined around a flask, stars orbiting a cauldron, equations written in symbols that shimmered faintly when looked at directly. "This is it," Hermione whispered, moving to the nearest sketch. "The philosopher's shadow, the forbidden formula. But these are prototypes, rough drafts. Whoever drew these was experimenting, trying to refine it." Viktor studied one showing a human figure split in two, one half luminous, the other shadowed. "They weren't trying to make gold," he said slowly. "They were trying to separate something, soul from body, light from dark, or balance them," Hermione corrected. "Look here, this equation cancels out the destructive resonance. The version we found in the monastery. It's missing this counterweight. It's incomplete, dangerous." She turned to the book on the pedestal. His fingers hovered over the cover. This might hold the full truth, the original intent. Viktor placed a hand on her shoulder, warm, steady. "If it's dangerous, maybe we leave it." She looked up at him, really looked, and saw not just the famous seeker, or the man she danced with so long ago, but someone who'd lost as much as she had. Friends, peace, years to war and silence. If we leave it, someone else will find it. "And they won't ask the right questions." He held her gaze, then nodded once. "Then let's make sure we understand it first." She opened the book. The first page bore a single sentence in elegant script. Star. To restore, one must first unravel. Star beneath it, a sketch of two figures, one holding a flame, the other a vial of shadow, standing together before a door marked with the same symbol, now glowing faintly on the chamber's floor. Hermione's breath stilled. "It's not a weapon," she whispered. "It was meant to heal." The air in the chamber was thick with the scent of old parchment, and something sharper, ozone perhaps, or the metallic tang of long-dormant magic stirring awake. Hermione brushed her fingers along the stone archway, the runes beneath her touch pulsing faintly, like a slow, sleeping heartbeat. Before them, framed in blackened silver and set into the wall like a forgotten shrine, was the portrait. Not a mere painting. This one breathed. The alchemist's chest rose and fell beneath a moth-eaten robe, the color of dried blood, and his eyelids fluttered, as though caught between dreams and waking. Viktor stood close behind her, his presence, a quiet warmth, against the chill of the mountain vault. "He looks tired," he murmured. Hermione exhaled. "He's been waiting." As if summoned, the alchemist's eyes snapped open, two pools of liquid mercury, reflecting not the dim torchlight, but something older, deeper. His lips parted, and his voice came not from the portrait, but from everywhere at once, echoing in the bones more than the ears. "You are late," he said, his tone, neither accusing nor kind, nearly factual, like the turning of seasons. "We didn't know we were expected," Hermione replied, lifting her chin. "Not until the monastery's archives began to burn with no flame." "A flicker of something. Regret?" asked over the painted face. "Fire without flame. Yes, that was my doing. A warning carved in ash. I hoped someone would come, someone who remembered what alchemy was meant to be." Viktor took a step forward. "We seek the formula, the one they call star aurum lacrima star." The alchemist's gaze shifted to him, lingering. "Ah, the seeker with sorrow in his stride. You carry loss like armor. But why do you seek it? Power? Redemption?" "Neither," Viktor said quietly. "I seek to understand what was lost." Hermione glanced at him, surprised by the raw honesty in his voice. She had seen him guarded, stoic, always the former champion, the disciplined seeker. But here, in the presence of something ancient and unyielding, he seemed unmasked. The portrait sighed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. "The formula is not merely ink on parchment. It is memory. It is blood. It was never meant to be star used star, only star remembered. Star. Then why hide it?" Hermione pressed. "Why seal it behind dragonfire and riddles?" "Because memory can be weaponized," he said, his voice dropping. "I watched empires fall to men who sought to remake life in their image, to cheat death, to forge gods from lead and pride. The star aurum lacrima star does not create gold. It creates star life star, not as nature intends, but as the alchemist dictates. Souls stitched from regret, bodies from wanting." A silence settled between them. Hermione felt the weight of his words like a stone at her chest. "You're saying it's necromancy," she whispered. "No," the alchemist said. "Worse, it is star replacement star. A child for a lost child, a lover for a buried one, not resurrection, star replication star. And each time it is attempted, the world frays, the veil thins. That is why I hid it. That is why I bound it with silence." Hermione thought of Harry's hollow eyes after the war, of Ron's laughter that never quite reached his heart anymore, of her parents, safe and happy, forgetting her completely. How easy it would be to star it, to bring back what was gone. She caught Viktor's gaze. He looked away first. "You knew," she said softly. "You knew what it could do." He nodded once. "My mother. After the war, there were rumors that she might still be alive, that someone had seen her in the north. I searched for years. And then I found a scroll, a fragment. It spoke of a ritual, of a way to call the lost back. And I destroyed," he said, voice rough, "because I knew what came back wouldn't be her." The alchemist watched them both, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he reached out a painted hand toward the frame. "One truth I will give you," he said. "The formula is already broken. I shattered it before I died. But the pieces, they remember. And if you gather them, if you speak the names of the lost, the formula will try to rebuild itself. Not to serve you. To star-feed star on you." Hermione's breath caught. "Then why show us this?" "Because someone else is already trying," the alchemist whispered. "And they do not fear the cost." The wind howled through the cracked stone archway like a mourning spirit, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something older, charred parchment and cold iron. Hermione knelt beside the shattered altar, her fingers brushing the edge of a glyph barely visible beneath centuries of grime. Her wand trembled slightly in her other hand, the tip casting a soft blue glow that danced across the carvings. They spoke of sacrifice, of transmutation, not of metals, but of memory. To erase pain, the inscription warned, is to invite greater sorrow. She exhaled slowly, her breath fogging in the frigid air. This place, half buried beneath snow and silence, had once been a sanctuary for those who sought to heal through alchemy, not the crude pursuit of gold, but the deeper art, the mending of soul through balance, through acceptance. And yet the final chamber told a different story. One alchemist, driven by grief after losing a child to plague, had twisted the formula. He sought not to heal, but to unmake sorrow entirely, to erase the memory of loss as though it had never been. Hermione's chest tightened. She knew that impulse. She knew the weight of nights spent staring at the ceiling, replaying moments she wished she could rewrite. The screams in Malfoy Manor, the way Fred's laugh had cut off too soon, the hollow silence that followed Lupin and Tonk's names on a memorial list. She had read every book on trauma, every treatise on magical and muggle psychology. She had brewed calming draughts, cast occlumency shields, even tried a memory charm once. Just a small one, just to dull the edges. But the mind, like alchemy, demanded balance. Suppression only made the memories rise stronger, like steam under pressure. A crunch of snow behind her made her turn. Viktor stood in the archway, his face half-shadowed, his dark eyes watchful. He carried a satchel slung over one shoulder, its strap worn from use. He didn't speak at first, just studied her with that quiet intensity that had always unsettled her, because it felt like he saw too much. "You're pale," he said at last, his voice low, roughened by the cold. "I'm fine," she replied automatically, then softer, just, thinking. He stepped forward, boots scraping against stone. "This place, it gets inside you, like a whisper you can't shake." She looked back at the glyph. He tried to erase his grief, not transmute it, not understand it, just remove it, like peeling off a scar. "And it destroyed him," Viktor said, reading the final lines carved into the wall. "The formula consumed his mind." "Yes," Hermione whispered, "because sorrow isn't meant to be erased. It's meant to be carried, changed, made part of you." Silence settled between them, thick with unspoken things. Viktor shifted, then reached into his satchel. He pulled out a small leather-bound journal, water-stained, its pages brittle. "I found this in a northern pass. Belonged to the Alchemist. Last entry. It's dated the day before he disappeared." Hermione took it carefully, opening to the final page. The handwriting was jagged, desperate. "Star. I have almost succeeded. One more incantation, and I will forget her face. I will not feel the emptiness. But I fear I will forget her laugh too, her name, her warmth. Is this peace, or is it death?" Star. Hermione's throat closed. She thought of Ron, of how in the years after the war, they had tried to build something quiet, familiar. But grief had settled between them like dust, unspoken, unexamined. They had both been too tired to dig beneath the surface, and when it ended, it hadn't been with anger, but with silence. Two people who loved each other, but could not bear to remember the past out loud. Viktor sat beside her, not too close, but near enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "You carry your wars," he said quietly. "I see it, in your eyes, in the way you flinch at loud noise." She didn't deny it. "So do you." He gave a small, sad smile. "Yes, but I have learned it is better to carry them with someone." Outside, the wind died for a moment. Snow drifted through the broken ceiling, catching the light like falling stars, and in that fragile quiet, Hermione felt something shift. Not the absence of pain, but the possibility of sharing it. Maybe that was the real alchemy. Not to unmake the past, but to transform it. Through truth, through presence, through the courage to remember. Together. The ground shuddered beneath their feet as the first stone cracked, a jagged line splitting the ancient flagstones like lightning frozen in time. Dust rained from the ceiling of the subterranean vault, catching in Hermione's throat as she stumbled forward, her fingers still clutching the brittle scroll case. The air hummed now, a low, dissonant thrum that vibrated in her teeth. "It's collapsing," she said, voice tight. "The alchemical lattice. It's overloading." Viktor's hand clamped around her arm, pulling her back just as a pillar groaned and shattered, sending debris skittering across the floor. "This way," he shouted over the rising din, already dragging her toward a narrow archway she hadn't noticed before, half buried beneath fallen masonry and veiled in shadow. "I thought that passage was sealed," Hermione gasped, ducking as a chunk of ceiling exploded behind them. "It was," Viktor said, jaw clenched. "But magic like this, it does not obey walls." They sprinted through the arch, the corridor narrowing quickly, the walls slick with condensation and covered in glyphs that pulsed faintly with residual energy. Behind them, the vault imploded with a thunderous roar, a wave of heat and force slamming into their backs. Hermione cried out as her shoulder struck the stone, but Viktor didn't let go. His grip was iron, his breath ragged but steady. "We can't stop," he said. "Not yet." The tunnel sloped downward, then abruptly split. Hermione hesitated, eyes scanning the carvings flanking each passage. One bore the sigil of Mercury, the other, a twisted serpent coiled around a key. Left, she decided. The Mercury path, it's associated with transit, movement. This place was designed by alchemists. They encoded their logic into the symbols. Viktor didn't argue. He never did when it came to her knowledge. There was trust there, quiet, unspoken. And in that moment, it was the only thing holding her together. The air grew colder as they pressed on, their wands casting trembling light over walls that seemed to breathe. Cracks spider-webbed upward, and from the fissures, a strange mist seeped, silver and shimmering, like liquid moonlight. It coiled around their ankles, whispering in a language Hermione almost recognized. "Do not touch it," Viktor warned, voice low. "It feels hungry." She nodded, stepping carefully, but the ground shifted again, and she slipped, her palms slamming into the mist. Instantly, images flooded her mind. Fire on a battlefield, screams lost in smoke, a hand reaching for hers and dissolving into ash. The grief was sudden, suffocating, not hers alone, but layered, ancient. Hermione. Viktor yanked her back, his arms wrapping around her. As she gasped, shaking, "Look at me." "Breathe." She clung to him, her face buried in the coarse fabric of his coat, heart-hammering. "It's showing us memories," she whispered. "Not just ours, the ones who died trying to protect this formula. Their pain, it's part of the magic." He cupped her face gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Then we honor them by surviving." She nodded, swallowing hard. They moved again, slower now, the mist retreating as if cowed by their resolve. The passage began to climb, the air thinning. Ahead, a faint glow pulsed, not magical, but natural, moonlight. "An exit," Viktor murmured, but the earth chose that moment to convulse. A fissure opened beneath them, splitting the path in two. Hermione screamed as the stone beneath her collapsed, but Viktor lunged, catching her wrist just in time. She dangled over blackness, fingers slipping. "Hold on," he growled, muscles straining as he hauled her up. They collapsed together on the remaining ledge, panting. Above, a crack split the ceiling, and through it, stars, cold, distant, beautiful. Viktor helped her to her feet. "We're close." And then, step by trembling step, they climbed, through rubble, through silence, through the ghosts of what had been and what might yet be. When they finally emerged onto a windswept ridge, the monastery far below, now a smoldering ruin, they stood shoulder to shoulder, breath fogging in the mountain air. She looked at him, really looked. At the scar along his temple, the quiet strength in his stance, the way his hand still refused to let go of hers. "We're not done," she said. "No," he agreed. "But we are still here." The wind howled through the pines like a chorus of forgotten spirits, bending the ancient trees until their branches scraped against one another with a sound like bones. Snow fell in thick, silent waves, blanketing the forest floor in white, muffling the world beyond the small, crooked cabin, nestled in a hollow between two mountain slopes. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of pine resin and damp wool, the single hearth casting long, trembling shadows across the rough-hewn walls. Hermione sat cross-legged on a moth-eaten rug, her back against the wall, knees drawn to her chests. Her fingers trembled slightly as she wrapped them around a chipped clay cup of tea, bitter mountain mint brewed from herbs. Viktor had gathered before the storm closed in. He stood near the fire, his broad silhouette outlined in flickering gold, carefully feeding twigs to the flames. Water dripped from his dark coat, pooling on the wooden floorboards. "I didn't think it would snow this early," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "It is not usual," Viktor replied, not turning. "But the mountains remember old magic. They speak when they choose." She watched him. There was something different about him now, more still, more contained. The boy she'd known at Hogwarts, earnest and shy, had weathered years of silence, of solitude, of loss. His face was sharper, his movements deliberate. Yet when he glanced at her, something warm flickered in his eyes, something that made her chest tighten. The cabin had been abandoned for years, perhaps decades. Dust coated every surface, and the shelves were lined with empty jars and brittle scrolls written in a script she didn't recognize. Still, it was warm, safe, for now. "You're cold," he said suddenly, stepping toward her. Without waiting for permission, he draped his heavy wool coat over her shoulders. It was thick, and smelled faintly of wood smoke and snow. "I'm fine," she whispered, but didn't push it away. He sat across from her, close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jawline, a remnant of some old injury. "You do not have to be fine, Hermione." She looked down into her tea. The steam had faded. "I keep thinking about what we found in the monastery. That formula, it speaks of transmutation. Yes, but not just of metals. It speaks of life, of memory, of bringing back what's gone." Viktor was silent for a long moment. Then, quietly, "You think it could bring back the dead?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but I fear it could be used that way. And that kind of power, it twists people. Look at what it did to Voldemort." "The dead should stay dead," he said, his voice low. "I have seen men try to speak to ghosts. They lose themselves in the echo." She looked up. "You've seen that?" He nodded. "After the war in my village, a man tried to summon his son. He's forbidden runes. By morning he was gone, walked into the forest and never returned. They found his eyes on a stone 3 days later. Open, still seeing things." Hermione shivered. Viktor leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "But I also think, perhaps some things can be restored. Not people, but pieces. Peace. Understanding." She studied him. "Do you think we've found peace?" "No," he said, "but I think we are looking for it." The fire crackled. A log collapsed, sending up a shower of sparks. Outside, the storm raged on. But here, in the dim light of the cabin, with snow piling against the windows and the wind singing through the trees, there was a stillness, a quiet that felt sacred. Hermione set her cup aside and pulled the coat tighter. "I used to think magic was about control, precision, rules." "And now?" he asked. "Now I think it's about listening. To the world, to each other." He smiled then, small, but real. "Then we are learning." And for the first time in years, she believed it might be true. Dawn bled through the narrow stone window of the monastery guest chamber, painting the rough-hewn walls in soft golden shadow. Hermione stirred beneath the coarse wool blanket, her breath slow and even, until a faint warmth pulsed against her skin. Not heat, something sharper, deeper, like the hum of a spell just before it breaks. She blinked awake, frowning, and lifted her hand to her face. On the inside of her left wrist, a symbol glowed with a pale silver light. She sat up so fast the room tilted. The symbol, a complex alchemical sigil she'd only ever seen in fragmented texts, was etched into her skin as if drawn by moonlight. It pulsed once, twice in time with her heartbeat, then dimmed to a soft shimmer. She rubbed at it with her thumb, but it didn't smudge or fade. It wasn't ink, it wasn't a burn. It felt alive. Her breath came quicker. Last night we played in fragments, the crumbling manuscript in the monastery's hidden archive, the strange resonance when she'd whispered the incantation aloud, the way the air had thickened, charged with magic older than Hogwarts. She'd thought it was just a translation exercise, a scholarly pursuit. But this was transmutation. Not of matter, but of essence. A knock at the door. "Hermione?" Viktor's voice, low and cautious. "You awake?" She pulled her sleeve down hastily, heart hammering. "Yes, come in." The door creaked open. Viktor stood in the frame, dressed in travel-worn robes, his dark hair still damp from the morning cold. He carried 2 clay mugs steaming with herbal tea. His eyes, deep and unreadable, flickered over her, then settled. "You look pale. he said, stepping inside. "I'm fine," she lied, taking the mug he offered. The warmth seeped into her fingers, but it did nothing to calm the thrumming beneath her skin. "Just didn't sleep well." He studied her a moment longer, then nodded, accepting the excuse. "The abbot wants to speak with us. Says there's been changes in the mountain." "Changes?" she asked, too quickly. "The path to the lower caves. It shifted. Stones moved overnight, like something woke beneath the ridge." She sipped the tea, bitter and sharp with mountain herbs, and tried to steady her thoughts. It couldn't be coincidence. The formula, the sigil, the earth itself responding. "What did you read last night?" Viktor asked suddenly, his voice quiet. Her breath caught. "An old text, about prima materia, the origin of alchemical transformation." "That's not all," he said, watching her. "I heard you. You spoke the words. The ones no one's supposed to say aloud." "I didn't mean—" "The air changed," he interrupted. "I felt it, like the world held its breath." He paused. "And now this." She looked up, startled. "You know something." He reached into his robe and pulled out a small leather-bound journal, her journal, the one she'd left open on the desk. "I didn't read it," he said, handing it over. "But when I passed by last night, the pages, they were glowing. Just for a second. The same symbol, the one on your wrist." Her blood ran cold. "It's not just me," she whispered. "No," Viktor said. "It's in the walls, in the stones near the archive. I found it carved into the floor, faint, like it's been there for centuries, waiting." She flexed her hand. The sigil flared slightly, as if in response to his words. A connection, a bond, not just to the formula, but to the mountain, to the magic buried beneath it. "What does it mean?" she asked. She looked at him, really looked. The lines at the corners of his eyes, the quiet strength in his stance, the way he didn't flinch from the unknown. "It means," she said slowly, "that the formula isn't just a secret. It's alive, and it's chosen us." The air in the monastery's hidden chamber was thick with the scent of old parchment, damp stone, and something sharper, ozone perhaps, or the ghost of a spell long since faded. Moonlight filtered through a narrow slit in the wall, casting a pale blade across the mosaic floor, where a single symbol had been etched into the stone. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat buried beneath centuries of silence. Hermione knelt beside it, her fingers hovering just above the surface. She'd seen similar sigils in the margins of alchemical texts, half-remembered diagrams from obscure treatises on transmutation and soul-binding. But this one was different. It shimmered, not with light, but with something deeper, as if it were breathing. "It's not just a mark," she murmured. "It's a key." Viktor stood a few paces behind her, his silhouette tall and still against the arched doorway. He'd been quiet since they'd entered, his voice low when he spoke, his movements careful, as though afraid to disturb the air itself. "You think it will open something?" "I think it already has," she said, glancing back at him. "This chamber wasn't on any of the maps. The wards outside, they responded to my wand, but not like they should. It was selective." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small notebook, flipping to a page covered in cramped script and charcoal sketches. "This symbol, it's linked to something called the star Aurum Vinculum star. I've only seen it referenced once, in a crumbling text at the Athenaeum in Prague. Supposedly it's not just alchemy, it's about resonance. Two magics, aligned in purpose, unlocking something neither could alone." Viktor frowned. "You're saying this thing. It needs two? Not just two," she corrected. "Two specific magics, or perhaps two specific people." He exhaled slowly, stepping forward. "Then you believe I'm one of them?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But your name was in the margins of that Prague text. A footnote, Star Krum, the. Tested but unresolved. Star, I thought it was a coincidence. Now, I'm not so sure." He crouched beside her, his shoulder nearly brushing hers. Up close, she could see the faint scar along his jaw, the one that curved like a crescent moon, a remnant from the war, from a curse that had missed his eye by a breath. His presence was solid, grounding, and for a moment she forgot the cold, forgot the weight of the mystery before them. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "Just place your hand over the symbol. Don't cast anything. Just let it feel you. He hesitated, then nodded. Slowly he lowered his palm toward the etching. The moment his skin neared the stone, the symbol flared. Not with fire, but with a soft golden light that rippled outward, like water disturbed by a stone. Hermione gasped. The air hummed, a low vibration that climbed up her spine and settled behind her eyes. The mosaic beneath them shifted, tiles sliding with the sound like whispering stone, revealing a narrow stairwell spiraling down into darkness. But it wasn't just the door that stunned her. It was Viktor. His hand glowed faintly, a warm amber tracing the veins beneath his skin, as if the magic had seeped into him. His breath caught, and for a moment his eyes, dark and deep, seemed to shine with the same light. "Hermione," he whispered. "I felt it, like it knew me." She stared at him, her pulse quickening. "It didn't just open the passage, it recognized you." He pulled his hand back, and the glow faded. But the symbol remained lit, pulsing gently like a heart that had found its rhythm. "And you? Did it—" "It didn't react when I touched it," she said softly. "Not like that." They looked at each other then, not as old friends reunited, not just as allies on a mission, but as something else, something unnamed, unformed, but undeniably present. Outside, the wind howled through the mountain pass, but below, in that hidden chamber, time seemed to still. The past years of silence, of letters unanswered, of lives lived in separate worlds, passed between them, heavy and quiet. And yet, in the afterglow of that strange alchemical light, something new stirred. A connection, a beginning. Rain laced the stone eaves of the monastery in silver threads, thrumming a steady rhythm against the moss-slick courtyard. Hermione stood beneath the arched doorway, arms wrapped tight around herself, the damp chill of the Balkan highlands seeping through her cloak. The air smelled of wet earth and old incense, the kind that clung to forgotten places. Behind her, the thick oak door groaned as Viktor stepped out, his boots heavy on the worn flagstones. "They're coming," he said, voice low. "Not just scholars, not just curious wizards." Hermione turned, her dark curls damp against her temples. "Who then?" He handed her a scroll sealed with crimson wax, bearing the crest of the Bulgarian ministry, a double-headed eagle clutching lightning bolts. "A team arrived an hour ago from Sofia. They've intercepted messages, encrypted, but not well enough. There's a group calling themselves the Alchemist Circle. They've been tracking the formula for months. Some say they've already killed for it." Her fingers trembled slightly as she broke the seal. The parchment crackled in her hands. "Alchemist, that's alchemical myth. The universal solvent. This formula isn't meant to dissolve matter, Viktor. It's meant to transmute loss, to restore what was taken. That's why it was buried. And that's why they want it," he said, gaze fixed on the distant peaks where storm clouds gathered like armies. "Not to heal, to control. Imagine a world where grief can be rewritten, memories rewritten, history itself unmade." She swallowed. The war had left its marks, not just on their bodies, but on their silences. She still woke some nights reaching for people who were gone. And Viktor, she'd seen the way he stared into the fire sometimes, as if searching for a face in the flames. A gust of wind howled through the valley, rattling the iron gates. Moments later, figures emerged from the mist. 4 witches and wizards in slate-gray ministry robes, hoods pulled low. Their leader, a woman with sharp cheekbones and eyes like flint, strode forward. "Hermione Granger," she asked, voice clipped. "I am Aliska Radiva. We've come to warn you. The circle moves fast. They've already breached the Dragon's Hollow. 2 of our scouts didn't return." Hermione's breath caught. "They've reached the cavern. They're after the philosopher's lament," Aliska said. "The final stanza. Without it, the formula is incomplete. But with it, he could unravel the boundary between life and death." Viktor stepped forward, jaw tight. "You think they'll try to resurrect the dead?" "Not resurrect," Aliska corrected. "Replace. They don't seek to bring back the lost. They seek to erase the loss, and in doing so, erase us. Our choices, our pain, our growth." She looked at Hermione. "You understand this better than most." Hermione nodded slowly. She thought of Harry's hollow eyes after the final battle, of Ron's laughter, never quite the same after Fred's name stopped being spoken at the dinner table. Pain was a thread in the weave of who they'd become. Pull it out, and the whole fabric might unravel. "We need to reach the Lament first," she said. "Before they do." Aliska handed her a small vial filled with liquid that shimmered like crushed stars. "This is a resonance charm. It will guide you to the inscription, but only if both of you carry it. The magic recognizes dual intent, not just knowledge, but understanding." Viktor took the vial, their fingers brushing. A flicker passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but something deeper. Recognition. Two people who'd carried too much, too long. Outside, the storm broke. Thunder rolled across the mountains like the footsteps of giants. Somewhere in the dark, the circle was moving. And deep beneath the earth, the Lament waited. A song of sorrow, power, and the price of second chances. The air in the chamber was thick with the scent of ancient stone and something sharper, ouzo perhaps, or the metallic tang of latent magic. Hermione's wand trembled slightly in her hand as its tip flared, casting long shadows across the arched walls covered in glyphs that pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat beneath the surface. Her breath came in measured draws, each one fogging in the cold. She stepped forward, boots echoing against the flagstones, and knelt beside the stone pedestal at the chamber center. Viktor stood a few paces behind, silent as ever, his silhouette framed by the narrow entrance they'd squeezed through after hours of climbing through ice-laced tunnels. His dark eyes scanned the room, wary. "This is it?" he asked, voice low, as if afraid the walls might answer. "This is where it ends," Hermione murmured, tracing a gloved finger over the symbols. "Or begins." "I'm not sure yet." The formula was etched into the pedestal in a spiral, written in a script that blended Aramaic runes with alchemical sigils. She only recognized from fragmented texts in the restricted section. Her pulse quickened. This was more than rediscovery. It was resurrection. And yet something felt off. "It stops here," she said, frowning. Her finger hovered over the final line of the inscription, where the script simply broke off. A jagged fissure split the stone, as though the carver had been interrupted, or had deliberately left it unfinished. Viktor crouched beside her, his knee cracking in the cold. Maybe the last part was lost. Earthquake, time, war. "No," she said. "This wasn't erosion. Look." She pointed to the groove where the chisel had ended. Clean, precise. It was meant to stop here. Someone didn't want it completed. A gust of wind howled through the chamber, snuffing her wand light for a breath. Viktor muttered a quick star. "Lumos star," his voice steadier than she felt. In the renewed glow the glyphs flickered again, this time forming a sequence she hadn't noticed before. She gasped. "They're not just instructions," she whispered. "They're a warning." "What does it say?" She translated slowly, syllable by syllable. "Star. To complete the work is to unmake the soul. The fire that heals consumes the hand that stirs it. Only the broken may begin. Only the whole may not finish." Star. Viktor exhaled. Sharply. So whoever made this, they walked away. They realized what it could do. Hermione stood, baking. Alchemy isn't just transformation of matter. It's transformation of the self. This formula, it doesn't just turn lead to gold. It promises immortality, reversal of death. But at what cost? The final step. It's not missing. It was erased. On purpose. Silence settled between them, heavy with implication. Outside, snow began to fall in thick, slow flakes, muffled by the mountain's weight. "You think someone's looking for it," Viktor said. "I know they are. The ministry intercepted 3 attempts to breach the monastery's wards in the last month. Someone believes the formula is incomplete by accident, not design." He looked at her, then really looked, his gaze softening in a way that made her chest tighten. "And you? What do you believe?" She turned back to the stone, her breath shivering in the cold. "I believe the war taught us that some doors shouldn't be opened, not even for the right reasons." A memory surfaced. Fred's laugh, Lupin's quiet smile, Tonk's bright hair, faces lost, never to return. The temptation to undo such pain was a whisper in her blood. But she had seen what happened when magic tried to cheat death. The resurrection stone, the elder wand. The cost was always greater than the gift. Viktor reached out, his hand brushing hers. "Then we keep it hidden." She nodded. eyes burning. We seal the chamber. No record. No trace. And if they come again? She met his gaze, resolute. Then we stand together. The wind sighed through the stones, as if the mountain itself had exhaled in relief. The air grew thick and warm as they stepped into the mouth of the cavern, a low hum vibrating through the soles of their boots. Hermione adjusted the strap of her satchel, fingers brushing the worn leather as she lit her wand with a whispered "Lumos." The glow was swallowed almost instantly by the amber depths ahead, where the walls shimmered like honeyed glass, refracting light into soft pulsing waves. Viktor moved ahead cautiously, his broad frame casting a long shadow that danced across the crystalline surface. "It's not natural," Hermione murmured, pressing her palm against the wall. The moment her skin made contact, a flicker of color sparked beneath her touch. A brief image of a woman in a flowing blue robe, arms raised beneath a stormlit sky. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only a faint warmth. "No," Viktor agreed, his voice low and careful. "This is memory made stone. Like the old Slavic charms, but older. Deeper." They pressed forward, the tunnel narrowing and curving downward in slow spirals. The crystals grew denser, their glow shifting in rhythm with the steady drip of unseen water. Each step triggered new impressions: a child laughing in a sunlit courtyard, a dragon circling a mountain peak, a whispered incantation in a language Hermione didn't recognize but felt in her bones. Her breath caught as one vision flared, especially bright: a man in dark robes inscribing symbols onto a stone tablet, his hands trembling, his eyes full of sorrow. "That's the formula," she whispered. "The one from the monastery text. I've seen it in fragments, but never like this, never complete." Viktor turned to her, his face half lit in the golden light. "And you still don't know what it does?" She hesitated. Alchemy was never just about gold or immortality. It was about transformation, balance. Some believed it could mend what was broken, not just matter, but soul. He studied her for a long moment. "And you think this formula could do that?" "I think it was meant to. But power like that, it can be twisted. Look what happened to the Philosopher's Stone." They walked in silence for a time, the weight of history pressing in around them. The air smelled of damp earth and something sweeter, like burnt sage and old parchment. Then, without warning, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow, its floor carpeted in moss that glowed faintly green. In the center stood a stone dais, cracked with age, upon which rested a single unbroken crystal the size of a human heart. It pulsed with a slow, rhythmic light. Hermione approached it cautiously, her wand trembling in her hand. "This is the source, the memories. They're not just echoes, they're bound to this crystal, trapped." Viktor stepped beside her, or waiting. She glanced at him. The what? For someone who remembers why it was hidden. A chill ran through her, not from the air, but from the truth of his words. She reached out, but before her fingers could touch the crystal, a whisper filled the chamber, not in any language, but in feeling. Grief, regret, hope. A lifetime of love lost in a plea, quiet but insistent. "Star, remember us." Star tears pricked her eyes. She thought of Harry's hollow look after the war, of Ron's restless wandering, of her own sleepless nights haunted by spells she couldn't uncast. And then she thought of Viktor, how he had found her in the ruins of that monastery, not with force, but with a letter written in careful script, asking only for help. "I think," she said softly, "it wasn't meant to be used, not really. It was meant to be witnessed." He nodded, his voice barely above a breath. "To remember is to heal," and as the crystal flared once, bathing them in amber light, the cavern filled with 1,000 silent voices, and for the first time in years, Hermione felt not the weight of the past, but the quiet grace of being seen by it. The air in the cavern was thick with the scent of damp stone, and something older, ozone maybe, or the metallic tang of magic long dormant. Hermione's wand trembled slightly in her hand, its glow casting wavering shadows across the curved walls. Before them, the passageway split into 3, each tunnel lined with cracked mirrors that shimmered with unnatural light. Viktor stood close, his shoulder brushing hers as he scanned the options. "This is not natural," he murmured, voice low. "Mirrors do not breathe." She exhaled slowly. "They're not mirrors, they're memory pools, the formula's guardians. They don't attack the body, they attack the mind. A beat of silence. Then from the leftmost archway, a flicker, lavender brown, laughing in the Gryffindor common room, her curls bouncing as she leaned toward Ron. Hermione's breath caught. That laugh so long unheard was a knife twisting in her ribs. She took an involuntary step forward. Viktor caught her arm. "Hermione, I know," she whispered. "It's not real, I know that. But knowing and feeling were worlds apart." From the center passage, a low wind stirred, and the reflection shifted. There, in the glass, stood her parents, smiling, holding hands, stepping off a plane in Australia. Her mother turned, called her name, Hermione, darling, and reached out as if she could pull her through the surface. Hermione's vision blurred. She hadn't let herself remember the weight of her mother's hug, the way her father tousled her hair and called her, "our little genius." The guilt surged, raw and suffocating. She had wiped them clean. She had made them forget her to keep them safe. "I didn't have a choice," she choked out. "No," Viktor said gently, "but the heart does not care for reason, does it?" From the right tunnel, a different image emerged. Viktor, younger, standing in the rain at a gravesite. A woman lay in the earth, her face pale, her hands folded over a small book. His mother. The memory rippled, and he flinched, jaw tightening. "She died in winter," he said, voice rough. "Not from war. From sickness. But still, I was not there. I was playing Quidditch in Ireland when the owl came." Hermione turned to him. "You couldn't have known." "No, but I carry it anyway." He looked at her, dark eyes haunted. "We carry what we cannot change." The cavern seemed to pulse around them. The reflections deepened, drawing them in. Lavender now stood sobbing on the battlefield, blood soaking her robes. Hermione's parents screamed her name as Death Eaters closed in. Viktor's mother reached for him, mouth forming silent words. "We have to move," Hermione said, forcing her voice steady. "These aren't warnings. They're anchors. The longer we stand here, the more they pull us under." Viktor nodded. But his feet didn't move. "What if we are meant to stay? To remember?" "No," she said firmly. "We remember so we can go on, not so we drown." She took his hand. His fingers were cold, calloused, but they curled around hers with quiet strength. "Then we face them," he said. Together, they stepped forward into the center arch. The air crackled. The images swirled. Ron's lifeless face at the Battle of Hogwarts, Viktor's father, burning the family grimoire in fear, Hermione burning her own childhood books to hide her magic. Each memory sharper than the last. But this time, they didn't look away. "I loved them," Hermione whispered, "and I let them go." "I grieve still," Viktor answered, "and that is not weakness." The mirror shattered, not with sound, but with silence. 1,000 fragments hung in the air, then dissolved like mist. The path ahead cleared, revealing a narrow bridge over a chasm filled with faint glowing runes. Hermione wiped her cheek, unaware she'd been crying. Viktor exhaled, long and slow. "We carry the weight," he said, "but we do not collapse beneath it." She squeezed his hand once, then released it. "No," she said. We walk forward. The air inside the cavern was thick with the scent of damp stone and something older, ozone and iron, like the breath before a storm. Hermione's wand trembled slightly in her hand, casting a narrow beam that danced over walls carved with glyphs that pulsed faintly, as if breathing. Behind her, Viktor moved with quiet precision, his boots crunching softly on a carpet of shattered glass-like crystals. They had come through the mountain pass at dawn, climbing the frozen ridge where ancient runes warned in a dead tongue. "Star, only the worthy may pass, the rest become dust." Now at the heart of the mountain, the formula's guardian waited. It stood at the chamber's center, a towering figure of molten silver and dark stone, joints humming with alchemical fire. Its eyes were twin vials filled with swirling liquid light, shifting from blue to red as they approached. Hermione swallowed hard. This was no mere golem. The way it turned its head, the subtle tilt of its shoulders, it watched them like a living thing. "Do not speak unless questioned," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "This isn't magic as we know it. It's star-made star, crafted from intent, memory, transmutation. It might test more than our knowledge." Viktor nodded once. his face grim in the flickering glow. He had changed since Hogwarts. Leaner, quieter, the boyish eagerness replaced by a deep, weathered calm, but she still recognized the way his jaw tightened when he was afraid. The construct stepped forward, and the floor trembled. "You seek the formula of unmaking," it intoned, voice resonating like stone grinding on stone. "Why?" Hermione lifted her chin. "To understand, to prevent misuse." A pause. Then a low hum, like a tuning fork struck deep within the mountain. "Knowledge without wisdom is fire without flame. Destructive, aimless. You witch have walked through war. You know death. Does that make you wise?" "I know what it costs," she said, voice steady. "And I know what it means to rebuild." The construct shifted, one massive hand opening. In its palm, a mirror formed. Not glass, but liquid metal. It showed Hermione as she had been at 17, covered in soot, clutching her wand, screaming for Harry in the ruins of Hogwarts. She flinched but did not look away. "And you, seeker from the Black Sea," the construct turned to Viktor. "Why do you walk this path?" He hesitated. "I come not for glory, nor for power. I come because she asked me." Hermione glanced at him, startled. The construct's eyes flared. "You risk much for a woman you have not seen in years." "I risk nothing I have not already lost," Viktor said quietly. "But if she believes this path leads to healing, then I walk it. Not for her, for what we might become." The words humming the air. Hermione felt them like warmth, spreading through her chest, fragile and unexpected. The mirror rippled, showing another image. Hermione and Viktor as children, laughing on the sunlit pitch in Bulgaria. Then a vision of the future. Then standing before a city reborn from ruins, hands almost touching, a golden light rising between them. "You are not one," the construct said, "but you are not apart. The formula does not belong to the strong. It belongs to those who remember pain and choose to mend." It knelt then, slowly, until its head was level with theirs. The hum softened, becoming almost melodic. "Prove your unity. Speak the truth the other does not know." Hermione's breath caught. She looked at Viktor. He met her gaze, steady. "She first," he said. She closed her eyes. "I came here not just to stop the formula from being misused. I came because I was afraid I had forgotten how to believe in anything. And I wanted to see you again. Not as a memory, as a person." Viktor exhaled. Then gently, "I wrote you letters for 7 years, never sent them. I thought you'd moved on, but when the call came, I knew, if I did not come, I would spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been." The construct stood. The light in its eyes shifted to gold. "The bond is true, the path is open." And with a sound like a sigh, the wall behind it dissolved into mist, revealing a narrow stair spiraling into the earth. The air in the cavern was thick with the scent of damp stone and something older, something metallic and sharp, like blood left too long in the sun. Torchlight flickered across the walls, casting long, wavering shadows that danced like specters around the chamber. At the center of the room, etched into the stone floor in a spiral of intricate runes, lay the alchemical circle. It pulsed faintly, a dull amber glow that seemed to breathe in rhythm with the mountain itself. Hermione crouched beside it, her fingers tracing the outer edge of the inscription. "It's not just about the elements," she murmured, more to herself than to Viktor. "Earth, fire, water, air, they're present, but they're not the key. The formula, it's incomplete without something else." Viktor stood a few paces behind her, his silhouette tall and still against the cavern wall. His voice, when it came, was low, roughened by the cold. "And you think that something is emotion?" She looked up at him, her brow furrowed. "I think the alchemist believes so. Look here." She pointed to a series of glyphs near the spiral's heart. "This sequence, it's not in any known alchemical language, but it resembles ancient Thracian script. I've seen fragments in the Black Sea monasteries. It speaks of sacrifice, but not of blood. Of star feeling star, of love, grief, hope, all bound into a single moment." Viktor stepped forward, his boots echoing too loudly in the silence. He knelt beside her, his shoulder nearly brushing hers. "So what you're saying is, the final ingredient isn't a thing, it's a memory." Hermione exhaled slowly. "It's more than that. It's the weight of what we carry. The alchemist, Zarev, from the manuscripts, lost his wife during the Ottoman invasions. He spent decades trying to recreate life, to undo death. But he didn't understand, until the end. The formula only works if the caster offers up a true emotional anchor. Not just sorrow, not just joy. The moment where both are present at once. She hesitated, then added, "It's not magic as power, it's magic as memory." Viktor was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was softer. "I think I know what he felt." She turned to him, surprised. "After the war," he said, not looking at her, "I came back here, to the mountains. I stood on the peak where we used to train, where we once talked." He paused. "I thought if I could just feel it again, if I could remember what it was like before everything changed, I could fix something in myself. But I couldn't. And I realized I wasn't trying to heal, I was trying to escape." Hermione's breath caught. She reached out almost without thinking, and placed her hand over his. His skin was cold, but beneath it she felt the steady pulse of life. "I think that's what the circle wants," she said gently. "Not denial, not revenge. Just truth." They rose together, stepping into the center of the spiral. The glow intensified, the runes flaring now with a golden light that climbed up their legs, their torsos, until it wrapped around them like a veil. The air hummed, not with power, but with presence, like the mountain was listening. Hermione closed her eyes. She thought of Ron, of laughter in the burrow, of quiet nights by the fire, of the slow unraveling of love worn thin by time and war. She thought of Harry, of Ginny, of the lives they'd built without her, of the loneliness she'd carried like a second skin. And then she thought of Viktor, of his quiet strength, of the way he'd found her in the snow 3 weeks ago, of the way he'd looked at her when she'd doubted herself, as if she were still the girl who'd danced with him at the Yule ball. Tears slipped down her cheeks, warm against the cold. Viktor reached for her, his arms pulling her close, and in that embrace, amid the ancient stones, beneath the weight of centuries and sorrow and longing, the circle ignited. Not with fire, but with light. The wind screamed like a wounded beast, tearing at the fragile shelter they'd cobbled together from fallen timbers and enchanted firs. Snow piled against the eastern wall in thick, suffocating waves, and inside the narrow cave, the cold seeped through layers of wool and dragonhide, as if it had a will of its own. Hermione pressed her back against the stone, shivering despite the warming charm she'd cast, weak now, sputtering under the storm's relentless assault. Her fingers, stiff and pale, clutched the edges of her cloak tighter. Across the small space, Viktor sat with his knees drawn up, his broad frame hunched like a storm-worn oak. His face was half in shadow, the firelight catching the deep lines around his eyes, not just from age, but from years carrying silence. He'd said little since the blizzard trapped them, only practical things. We wait, fire low, eat, but now even his breath seemed heavier, burdened. "I always wondered," he said suddenly, voice low and rough, "if you thought of me after the war." Hermione blinked. The question hung in the air, sharper than the cold. She hadn't expected this, not here, not now, with the world buried beneath ice and fury. "I did," she admitted, softer than intended. "Not often, but, yes." He nodded slowly, staring into the embers. "I thought of you every winter." She turned her gaze to the fire, watching the last blue flicker of the charm die. "Why?" "Because you were warm," he said. "Not just body, but like—" He paused, searching for words in a language not his own. "Like you made sense of things, when nothing else did." Hermione swallowed. Outside, the wind howled through the mountain pass, shaking loose a cascade of snow from the ledge above. A fine dust fell through the crack in the roof, glittering in the dark. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought, after the tournament, after the war, we just moved on." "We did," he said. "But some things, they don't move. They stay." She looked at him then, really looked. His dark eyes held a quiet ache, the kind that didn't shout, but had lived too long in solitude. She remembered the boy who'd asked her to the Yule ball with nervous grace, who'd kissed her hand like she was something rare. And then the man who'd fought in shattered battles no one spoke of, who'd buried friends under foreign soil and never asked for praise. "I'm sorry," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For not writing." For not reaching out. I thought you wouldn't want to remember me. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. You were the one thing I didn't want to forget. The admission settled between them like snowfall. Gentle, inevitable. Hermione felt something inside her crack just a little. Not grief, not guilt, but the slow release of something long held. I lost people too, she said, her voice unsteady. Fred, Lupin, Tonks, so many. And after, I thought if I kept moving, kept working, I wouldn't have to feel it. But I do, every day. Viktor leaned forward, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his stubble, the weariness in his gaze. You don't have to be strong now, he said. Not here, not with me. Tears welled, hot and sudden, and she didn't fight them. They fell in silence, freezing almost instantly on her cheeks. He didn't reach for her. Didn't offer empty comfort. Just stayed, present, as the storm raged on. After a long while, she whispered, I used to dream about Bulgaria, about the lake, the stars, you. He exhaled a soft breath that trembled to the cold. So did I. And in that frozen cave, with the world erased beyond the mouth of the shelter, they sat in the quiet truth of what had been, and what, perhaps, could still be, not fixed, not healed, but shared. The wind howled through the cracked stone arches of the abandoned monastery, carrying with it the scent of snow and old parchment. Inside the relic chamber, Hermione knelt beside a shattered sarcophagus, her fingers brushing dust from a leather-bound journal. The cover was scorched, the corners curled like burnt leaves, but the sigil upon it, a serpent coiled around a flame, was unmistakable. Alchemy. Forbidden alchemy. This is it, she whispered, voice barely carrying over the wind. The alchemist's journal. Viktor stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by moonlight. He said nothing at first, only watched her with those dark, steady eyes. Then he stepped inside, the floor groaning beneath his boots. You sure? She nodded, already tracing the embossed symbol with her thumb. This belonged to Elias Farrick. He was exiled from the International Confederation of Wizards over a century ago for experimenting with soul transmutation. They said he tried to cheat death. Viktor exhaled slowly. And did he? Hermione opened the journal carefully, the spine cracking like dry bone. The pages were brittle, the ink faded to sepia, but the script was precise, elegant even. She read aloud. Yen, the star. The formula is not a key to life, but a bridge between endings. It does not restore what is lost. It remembers it. A silence settled between them, thick and cold. That doesn't sound like resurrection, Viktor said. No, she agreed. It sounds like something softer, more dangerous in its own way. She turned the page. A sketch filled the next spread, a heart wrapped in chains of runes, suspended above a basin of liquid fire. Beneath it, a single sentence in bold script. Star. To awaken memory is to invite grief. To master it is to court oblivion. Star. Hermione's breath caught. What is it? Viktor asked, stepping closer. She pointed. Look at the runes. They're not just alchemical. They're protective, warding. This wasn't meant to be used. It was meant to be contained. Why? She flipped further, her pulse quickening. The entries grew more frantic. 8 skipped. Ink blotted the pages as if written in haste. Star, I have seen her again. Star, one passage read. Star, my Leora. Her voice, her hands. But she does not know me. She is not real. The formula calls the echo, not the soul. And each time I summon her, I lose a little of myself. Star. Hermione paused, her throat tight. Viktor's voice was low. He was bringing her back, but not really. No, she said. It wasn't resurrection. It was remembrance made flesh. A memory given temporary form. But the cost, it was his own soul, piece by piece. She turned another page. A diagram followed, complex, spiraling, like a clockwork heart. At its center, a single drop of blood. The caption read, Star, the vessel must be willing. The heart must be broken. The name must be spoken in sorrow. Star. Hermione closed her eyes. It's not a formula for immortality. It's a ritual for the bereaved. A way to say goodbye, one last time. Viktor was quiet for a long moment. Then, softly, "And if someone used it now," she looked up. "If they don't understand the cost, if they're not ready to let go," she shook her head. "They could lose themselves completely, become hollow. A vessel for ghosts." Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains, distant but growing. Snow began to fall in thick, silent flakes. Viktor crouched beside her. "You lost people too." She didn't answer right away. The firelight flickered across the pages, illuminating the trembling of her hands. "I think that's why I came. Not just for the ministry, not just for answers." She swallowed. "I wanted to believe there was a way back, a way to hear their voices again." He didn't speak, just reached for her hand, his fingers rough but warm. She squeezed back. "But this isn't healing. It's haunting." Another page turned. This one bore a final entry, written in a shaky hand. "Star, I have destroyed the formula, but the journal remains. If you read this, know this. Love is not in the shadow of the past. It is in the courage to walk forward, alone." Star Hermione shut the book gently. Snow fell heavier now, blanketing the ruins in white. The wind had stilled. For the first time in weeks the air felt light. "We'll take it back," she said. "But not for replication, for sealing." Viktor nodded. "And then?" She looked at him, really looked, and smiled, small but true. "Then we go home." The wind howled through the jagged peaks like a chorus of forgotten spirits, tearing at Hermione's cloak as she crouched behind a crumbling stone archway. Snowflakes stung her cheeks, and her breath came in short, white bursts. Behind her, Viktor moved with the quiet grace of a man who had spent years navigating mountain silence, his dark eyes scanning the pass ahead. "We should turn back," she said, voice low. "This storm is worsening. We're not even certain the next ruin is in this direction." Viktor exhaled, long and measured. "We are close, Hermione. I can feel it. The monastery's records." "The monastery's records are centuries old, and written in riddles," she snapped, then regretted it instantly. Her fingers tightened around the leather satchel strapped across her chest. Inside, the brittle parchment crackled faintly, as if alive. "And even if we find this place, what then? Do we really know what the formula does? Or only what people fear it might?" He turned to face her, snow settling in his thick, dark hair. "You once told me knowledge should never be feared, only misunderstood. That was before I saw what knowledge can cost," she whispered. The image of Fred Weasley's empty chair at the Burrow flickered behind her eyes, of Dumbledore falling, of the way Harry's hand shook after the final curse. Viktor stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I know what you carry, but this could change things. Healing beyond magic. A second chance. A second chance for whom?" She looked up at him, rain and snow melting in her lashes. "The dead, we can't bring them back, Viktor. No alchemy. No spell, nothing undoes death." "Not death," he said softly, "but perhaps pain, memory. What if we could ease the weight, not erase it? Just soften it?" She stared at him. That was new, not resurrection, not immortality, but healing. "You never said that before?" she said. He shrugged, a small, tired movement. "I did not know it myself until now." A distant rumble echoed through the mountains, too deep for thunder. The ground trembled beneath their boots. Hermione gripped the archway for balance. "Rock slide?" she asked. Viktor shook his head, his jaw tightening. "Not natural. They're following us." She didn't need to ask who. The ministry's envoys had been suspicious from the start. And then there were the others, the ones in gray cloaks who'd watched them from the edge of the forest. 2 nights passed, silent as shadows. "We can't go back," Viktor said. "Not with them behind us." "And we can't go forward blindly," she shot back. "We don't even know if this formula is real, or just another myth wrapped in smoke and desperation." "Then let's find out," he said, reaching for her hand. "Together." She hesitated. His palm was rough, warm. A lifetime of Quidditch and solitude lived him at touch. "You still don't trust me," he said, not accusing, just stating. "It's not about trust," she whispered. "It's about consequence. Every choice we make now ripples. One mistake and we could unleash something we can't control, and if we do nothing, he asked. "If we turn away from every mystery out of fear." The wind stilled for a breath. Snow fell in slow spirals. She looked past him, toward the narrow pass veiled in mist. Somewhere beyond it, hidden in ice and time, lay the next ruin, the next clue, maybe even the heart of the alchemical formula that had drawn them across continents. Her fingers curled into his. "Then we go," she said. "But on one condition. If it's dangerous, if it risks more than we can bear, we destroy it. No debate, no second thoughts." Viktor studied her face, then nodded. "You have my word." They stepped forward, side by side, into the narrowing path. Behind them the snow began to shift. Too deliberately, too quietly. Footprints appeared in the fresh powder, leading from the trees. Watching, waiting. Then deep beneath the mountain, something ancient stirred. The wind howled through the broken arches of Sunshadow Hall like a spirit unwilling to rest, carrying with it the scent of damp stone and centuries-old dust. Hermione pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, the chill of the high Carpathian seeping through wool and skin alike. Before them, the ruins sprawled across the mountainside in jagged silhouette, half swallowed by ivy and time. Crumbling towers leaned at impossible angles, their once proud spires now tooth-like against the bruised twilight sky. She stepped over a fractured column etched with runes long faded, her fingers tracing the cold grooves in the stone. "This was once the greatest school of alchemical study in Eastern Europe," she murmured, more to herself than to Viktor. "They say it fell not to war but to ambition. A philosopher tried to transmute sorrow into light, and unraveled the very fabric of the place." Viktor stood a few paces behind, his dark eyes scanning the ruin with quiet intensity. He carried his wand low at his side, not in threat, but readiness. "And now we return to dig through the bones of their failure." She turned to him, catching the flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. "Not failure, caution. They locked the formula away for a reason. We're not here to repeat their mistakes, we're here to understand them." He gave a slow nod, his breath misting in the air. "Then let us not linger in the cold." They moved deeper into the compound, past a shattered courtyard where alchemical symbols were still visible beneath layers of moss. Hermione lit her wand, the soft blue glow revealing fragments of old texts scattered like fallen leaves, pages yellowed and brittle, ink blurred by rain and time. One passage caught her eye. "Star, the heart cannot be measured, yet it is the crucible." "Star," she knelt, brushing dirt from the parchment. This isn't just theory. It's a warning. The formula doesn't work without emotional resonance. It demands sacrifice, not of blood, but of memory." Viktor crouched beside her, his shoulder nearly brushing hers. "You think it feeds on grief?" "I think it mirrors it," she said softly. "Like a philosopher's stone, forged from regret. That's why it was banned, not because it was dangerous, but because it was honest." A silence settled between them, heavier than the mountain air. Viktor looked away, his jaw tightening. "I still dream of the war, not the battles, the quiet after, the bodies in the snow." Hermione exhaled slowly. "So do I, Ron, Harry, we survived, but we didn't escape." He met her eyes then, and for the first time she saw not the famed Quidditch captain, not the stoic Bulgarian, but the man beneath, the one who had carried his own silence for years. "You once wrote me a letter," he said, "after the Battle of Hogwarts. You said hope was not foolish, it was necessary." She blinked, surprised he remembered. "And you wrote back. But what if it is not enough?" He gave a faint, rueful smile. "I was wrong, it was enough. You were enough." Her heart clenched. She looked down at the parchment in her hands, then back at the ruins around them. Maybe that's the real alchemy, not turning lead to gold, but turning pain into purpose. A low hum began beneath their feet, subtle at first, a vibration in the stone like a pulse awakening. The runes beneath the courtyard began to glow, faintly at first, then brighter, tracing a path toward a collapsed chamber beneath the central tower. "It's responding," Hermione whispered. "The formula, it's still active." Viktor rose, offering her a hand. "Then let it speak, but we decide what to do with its truth." She took his hand, her fingers curling around his warm, strong reel. Together, they stepped toward the glowing path, into the heart of the ruin, where ancient magic waited not to destroy, but to be understood. The wind howled through the broken arches of the high mountain ruin, carrying with it the scent of damp stone and something older, ozone perhaps, with a metallic whisper of long-dead spells. Hermione clutched the satchel tighter against her chest, its weight both comforting and terrifying. Inside, wrapped in layers of spelled cloth, lay the first fragment of the alchemical formula, a brittle parchment inscribed with symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim light, like a heartbeat beneath glass. Viktor stood a few paces ahead, his silhouette stark against the storm-heavy sky. He turned, his dark eyes scanning the crumbling perimeter. "We should not stay here," he said, voice low. "This place, it remembers violence." "I know," Hermione replied, brushing frost from her sleeve, "but the second fragment is close. I can feel it, like a pull behind my ribs." Before he could answer, the ground trembled, not an earthquake, but the deliberate thud of heavy boots. Shadows detached themselves from the ruin's broken colonnade. 5 figures, cloaked in enchanted leather and carrying wands fused with iron runes, advanced with the precision of trained mercenaries. Granger, one of them called, a woman with a scar bisecting her left eyebrow. Her accent was sharp, Eastern European. "You've led us a merry chase across 3 countries. Hand over the parchment, now." Hermione stepped back instinctively, but Viktor moved to block her, his wand already in hand. "You are trespassing on sacred ground," he said, voice steady. "This is not treasure, it is memory." The woman laughed, short and brittle. "Memory doesn't buy castles. That formula can transmute base metal into gold, restore youth, even, rumor says, bring back the dead. We've lost enough to war. We'll take our chances." Hermione's breath caught. That wasn't what the formula did. Or at least, not all of it. There were gaps in the translation, warnings etched in a dialect so old even she had struggled to parse them. "To seek wholeness is to risk unraveling star." One line read. She didn't say that now, not with wands pointed at her chest. "Last warning," the woman said, raising her own wand. "Drop the satchel." Viktor didn't move. "Run if you must, Hermione. I will hold them." "No." She drew her wand, fingers steady, despite the chill in her bones. "We face them together." The first spell came fast, a jagged bolt of crimson light that shattered a pillar between them. Viktor deflected the next with a sweeping arc, countering with a nonverbal star Protego Maximus star that shimmered into place just as 3 more curses flew toward them. Hermione dropped to one knee, tracing a sigil in the dirt with the tip of her wand. "Star Terram Vogo Star," she whispered. The ruin groaned. Cracks spiderwebbed through the ancient stone, and from the fissures rose tendrils of earth, coiling like serpents to wrap around 2 of the attackers, yanking them off their feet. The leader snarled and lunged forward, slashing her wand in a figure 8. A blade of compressed air sliced toward Hermione's face. Viktor shoved her aside, taking the brunt across his forearm. Blood bloomed on his sleeve, but he didn't flinch. "Far obscuro draconis, star obscuro draconis, star," he roared. The sky above the ruin darkened further. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then from the mist-shrouded peak above, a deep, resonant growl echoed, ancient and furious. Wings, fast and leathery, beat once, twice, stirring the clouds. The treasure hunters faltered. "That's not possible," one muttered. "The Carpathian Ridge hasn't hosted dragons in centuries." "It remembers," Viktor said grimly, "and it protects." The dragon didn't attack. It circled, a shadow against the storm, its presence alone enough to make 2 of the mercenaries apparate away. Star pop star, star pop star, star pop star, leaving only the leader and 1 other. She glared at Hermione. "This isn't over. You don't know what you're guarding. You don't know what you're becoming." Then they vanished too, leaving only the wind and the echo of their threats. Hermione sagged against a broken column, her breath coming in short gasps. Viktor pressed a hand to his wound, wincing. "We should go," he said, "before they return with reinforcements." She nodded, but paused, looking up at the dragon, still circling above. "It's not guarding the formula," she murmured. "It's guarding star us star." Viktor followed her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps," he said softly, "it knows we're the only ones who might use it wisely." They stood in silence, 2 figures beneath a storm-lit sky, the weight of what they carried heavier than any gold. The wind howled through the cracked stones of the high mountain ruin, carrying with it the scent of frost and damp earth. Inside the collapsed chamber, shielded only by a fragile charm, Hermione had woven from moonlight and memory. She knelt over the brittle manuscript. Her fingers trembled, not from the cold, though her breath curled in white wisps before her face, but from the weight of understanding, settling like stone in her chest. The final symbol, the one that had eluded her for weeks, now glowed faintly beneath her fingertip, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. "It's not transmutation," she whispered, more to herself than to Viktor, who stood guard at the crumbling archway. "It's inversion." He turned, his dark eyes searching her face in the dim light of the enchanted lantern. "Inversion? What does that mean, Hermione?" She exhaled slowly, tracing the looping script that spiraled around a central glyph. A heart pierced by a serpent, coiled in alchemical symmetry. Everything we thought alchemy was balance, refinement, transformation of base into noble. It's all still true, but not here. This formula doesn't seek to change matter. It seeks to change fate. And to do that, her voice caught, it demands a price, not gold, not time, a life. Viktor stepped closer, his boots crunching on fallen mortar. "A life? You mean sacrifice?" "Yes." She looked up at him, her eyes glistening but steady. "Not symbolic, literal. The final step, the missing catalyst. It's not an ingredient, not a spell. It's star, giving star, willingly. A soul offered in exchange for the transformation. That's why the formula was buried. That's why it was forbidden." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind's mournful song through the ruins. Viktor crouched beside her, his presence warm despite the chill. "And what does it transform?" She unrolled a second parchment, one she'd reconstructed from fragments found beneath the monastery's oldest foundation stone. According to the legends woven into the margins, it doesn't create gold. It creates star-life star, not just healing, not resurrection, but rebirth. True rebirth. A second chance, not just for the body, but for the soul. The kind that can mend what even magic cannot. Grief, regret, the scars that linger long after war is over. Viktor's jaw tightened, like bringing back the dead. "No." She shook her head. "That's not it. It doesn't reverse death. It creates something new star from start. Like a phoenix rising, but not from ash. From sorrow. From love given freely and moment of ending." She paused, her voice softening. "It's not about undoing loss. It's about transforming its meaning." He looked away, his profile carved in shadow and lamplight. "Thy father died in the war. Not in battle, in silence. He was cursed during the siege of Varna. Spent his last months unable to speak, unable to hold my mother's hand. I never told him I forgave him for being afraid." Hermione reached for his hand without thinking. "You forgave him?" "In my heart, yes, but he never heard it. That's the kind of wound this formula could touch, isn't it? Not bringing him back, but making his absence bearable in a different way. Not a scar, but a scar that sings." She squeezed his fingers. "Yes, but only if someone is willing to pay the price to activate it. And it can't be forced. It has to be freely given. A life, offered not for power, not for glory, but for love." Outside, the wind stilled. The stars above, sharp and bright in the thin mountain air, seemed to hold their breath. After a long moment, Viktor said, "Then the danger isn't just in the formula being used. It's in who might star want star to use it. Who would give anything to bring back someone they lost?" Hermione nodded. "And who might take a life to force it?" They sat in silence then, not speaking, the weight of the choice before them settling like snow on stone. The formula was complete. The secret was known, but the greater question remained, was such power a gift, or a temptation too terrible to keep? The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the Rhodope mountains, tearing at their cloaks like invisible claws. Snowflakes, sharp as glass, stung Hermione's cheeks as she crouched beside the crumbling archway of what might have once been a temple. Her fingers traced the frost-rimmed runes etched into the stone, murmuring under her breath as she translated the ancient script. The air hummed with latent magic, thick and metallic like the moment before lightning strikes. "We should turn back," Viktor said, voice low but firm. He stood a few paces behind her, shoulders hunched against the storm, his dark eyes scanning the shifting clouds above. "This place, it is not right." Hermione didn't look up. "This is the last marker on the map. If the formula is hidden anywhere, it's beyond that arch. We can't stop now." She tapped her wand against the stone, muttering a charm to clear the ice. The runes glowed faintly amber, then faded. "There's a ward, old but still active, that needs blood to open." "No," Viktor said, stepping forward, his hand closing over her wrist. "Not yours." She turned, startled by the intensity in his voice. Snow clung to his beard, and his breath came in white puffs, but his gaze was unwavering. "Viktor, I know what I'm doing. This kind of magic, it responds to intent. I'm not a threat." "You do not know that," he said, tightening his grip slightly. "Not enough to hurt, but enough to hold. This is alchemy older than Hogwarts. Older than wands. You cannot reason with it like a spell in a book. And you can," she shot back, pulling her hand free. "You've been silent for days, following me like a shadow, saying nothing, doing nothing. Now you suddenly decide to interfere." "I have been watching," he said quietly, "for you, for this." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. Hers, she realized with a jolt. She'd thought it lost in the cave beneath the monastery. "How did you—" "I took it," he admitted, "when you slept. I could not let you read the final pages, not without understanding the cost." She stared at him, betrayal and anger warring in her chest. "You had no right." "No," he said, "but I would do it again. That formula, it does not restore life. It steals it. To create gold from lead is one thing. To create life from death," he shook his head. "It takes a soul to make a soul. Yours would be the price." The wind stilled for a breath, as if the mountain itself was listening. Hermione swallowed. "You think I don't know the risks?" "I think you are brave," he said, stepping closer. "Too brave, you always were. But bravery is not the same as survival." His voice softened. "When I heard you were coming here alone, I came because I could not bear the thought of you facing this alone." She looked away, blinking fast. The cold bit deeper now, or perhaps it was something else. "You shouldn't have followed me," she whispered. "No," he said. "I should have come sooner." He paused, then gently placed the journal in her hands. "But now that I am here, I will not let you walk into that arch, not if it means losing you." She met his eyes then, deep, storm-gray, full of a truth she had spent years pretending not to see. "You don't get to decide that for me," she said, but her voice wavered. "No," he agreed, "but I get to stand beside you. And if you go, I go first." A silence stretched between them, fragile as ice on a frozen lake. Then slowly, Hermione nodded. "Then we go together," she said, "but no more secrets, not from each other." Viktor exhaled, as if he'd been holding his breath for years. He reached for her hand, his gloved fingers brushing hers before slipping between them, bare skin meeting bare skin. "Together," he said, and for the first time in a long time, the cold didn't feel quite so sharp. The air in the cavern was thick with the scent of damp stone and something older, something metallic, like blood on the wind or lightning caught in glass. The formula glowed before them, etched into a slab of obsidian that pulsed faintly, as though breathing. Hermione stood with her fingers hovering just above the surface, feeling the hum of raw magic vibrate through her bones. It wasn't just power, it was memory. Every symbol, every alchemical rune, whispered of sacrifice, of lives folded into knowledge, of love turned to gold and grief, distilled into elixir. Viktor stood beside her, silent, his shadow long in the flickering torchlight. His face was drawn, the lines around his eyes deeper than she remembered from their youth. He had not spoken since they found the chamber, not really, only a quiet, "This is it," when they stepped through the final archway, his voice rough with awe and something else, dread perhaps. "It's not just transformation," Hermione said at last, her voice low. "It's resurrection, not of bodies but of essence, of soul." She traced one of the central sigils with her eyes, not daring to touch. They weren't trying to make gold, they were trying to bring back the dead. Viktor exhaled slowly, And they paid. Yes, she whispered. Look at the margins. Names. Hundreds of them. Volunteers. Sacrifices. Each one gave a piece of themselves to stabilize the formula. Not just blood, memories, emotions. A mother's lullaby. A lover's last breath. It's woven into the magic. He stepped forward, his boots echoing on the stone. Could it work? She turned to him, searching his face. But if what cost? The formula is incomplete. It's stable now, but if someone tried to use it, really use it, it could unravel. It could take more than it gives. It could devour the caster, or worse, create something not right. A shadow with a heartbeat, a ghost wearing skin. He nodded, his jaw tight. I have seen magic like that before. After the war. In the forests near my village. Things that walked like men but didn't breathe. We burned them. Hermione shivered. Then you understand why we can't let this leave the mountain. But what if? He stopped, looked down at his hands. What if someone could be brought back, not for power, not for greed, but for love? Her breath caught. She knew then what he was thinking. His grandmother, who had raised him, gone too soon in a cursed fire. Or perhaps someone else, someone whose absence still carved a hollow in his chest even now. She reached for his hand, not thinking, and he let her take it. His palm was calloused, warm, real. I lost people too, she said softly. People I'd give anything to see again. But not like this, never like this. We can't cheat death, Viktor. Not without breaking something deeper. The world has a balance, and this is temptation wrapped in grief. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. So we destroy it. She nodded. We destroy it. Together. They stepped back from the slab. Hermione raised her wand and Viktor did the same. They didn't speak a spell. None existed for this. Instead, they began to unravel the magic, syllable by syllable, stroke by stroke, reversing the alchemical sequence they had spent months deciphering. It was slow, painstaking. The cavern resisted, the runes flared, the air crackled. But they continued. When the final sigil dimmed and the obsidian cracked down the center, a sound like a sigh passed through the chamber, soft, almost grateful. They stood in silence as the light faded. Outside, the first snow of winter was falling on the mountain, blanketing the path they would soon take down. The wind carried the scent of pine and distant smoke. Hermione turned to him. Do you think we did the right thing? Viktor looked at her, then at the snow beyond the cavern mouth. I think, he said slowly, that some things should not be held, only remembered. She smiled, small but sure. And for the first time in years, the weight in her chest didn't feel like sorrow. It felt like peace. The air in the cavern was thick with the scent of damp stone and ancient parchment, laced now with the sharp tang of crushed moonseed and powdered dragon scale. Hermione knelt beside the carved obsidian circle, her fingers tracing the final glyphs with deliberate care. The walls pulsed faintly, as if the mountain itself were breathing. Outside, snow lashed against the pass, howling through the cracks like lost spirits. Inside, silence reigned, deep, expectant, fragile. Viktor stood across from her, his shadow long and steady in the flickering blue glow of the enchanted torches. His dark eyes met hers, steady and calm. You are ready, he asked, voice low, barely more than a whisper against the hush. She nodded, swallowing. On 3. And Viktor, don't break the rhythm. The formula depends on synchronicity. I know, he said simply. I trust you. They raised their wands in unison. Hermione began the incantation, soft at first, syllables drawn from a forgotten dialect of old Bulgarian, woven through with alchemical runes that shimmered in the air like silver thread. Viktor answered in kind, his voice deeper, resonant, the counter-melody that completed the spell. The words spiraled together, rising like smoke, twining around the obsidian sigils until they glowed with an inner fire. The ground trembled. A low rumble rolled through the cavern, not violent, but profound, like the awakening of something ancient and long dormant. Dust sifted from the ceiling. The torchlight wavered, then intensified, casting long dancing shadows that seemed almost sentient. Hermione felt the spell thrum through her bones, a current of power that was neither wholly magical nor entirely alchemical, but something older, something primal. The circle flared. A column of iridescent light erupted from the glyphs, spiraling upward like a helix of liquid starlight. At its center, suspended in midair, a sphere of shifting colors formed, gold bleeding into indigo, crimson melting into silver. Within it, faint images flickered. A dragon coiled around a mountain peak, a woman in robes of ash weaving symbols in the air, a cauldron bubbling with light. "It's working," Hermione breathed, her heart hammering. Viktor didn't reply, but his jaw tightened, his focus absolute. Sweat beaded on his brow, and she knew he was feeling it too. The weight of the ritual, the way it pulled at their magic, their breath, their very thoughts. It was not just power being drawn, it was memory, intention, echoes of those who had come before. Then the mountain groaned. A crack split the floor near the circle's edge, jagged and sudden. The light wavered. Hermione's breath caught. "No, don't stop. Hold the chant." They pressed on, voices rising, harmonizing with a desperation born of understanding. This was not just about discovery. This was about survival. The formula was answering, and it was testing them. The visions intensified. Now she saw fire consuming a village, children screaming, a man in robes raising his hands, not to save, but to command. She saw war. She saw greed. She saw the formula twisted, used, misused. And then she saw something else. A garden, impossibly lush, blooming in the ashes. A child laughing, healed. A phoenix rising, not from flame, but from silence. "Redemption," she whispered, even as the chant continued. The sphere pulsed. The light softened. The tremors subsided, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that settled into the stone like a lullaby. Slowly the images faded. The column of light dimmed, retracting into the obsidian with a soft sigh. Only the sphere remained, now small, warm, floating gently between them, like a heartbeat, made visible. Hermione lowered her wand, trembling. Her fingers were numb, her vision swam. Viktor stepped forward, catching her elbow before she could fall. "Hermione," she looked up at him, dizzy with exhaustion and wonder. "We did it. But it's not a weapon, it's a choice." He stared at the sphere, his expression unreadable. "A second chance," he said quietly, "for those who deserve it." Outside, the storm broke. A sliver of moonlight pierced the clouds, spilling through the cavern entrance, like a benediction. And in that silence, with the weight of centuries behind them, and the future trembling in their hands, they stood together, battered, breathless, and unbroken. The air in the cavern tasted of iron and burnt herbs, thick enough to choke on. Torchlight flickered across the obsidian walls, casting long, trembling shadows that danced like specters. At the center of the chamber, the alchemical circle pulsed with a sickly green light, veins of magic threading through the stone beneath their feet. Hermione knelt at the northern edge, fingers pressed against the cold runes, whispering countercharms under her breath. Her hair clung to her dank neck, and her breath came in short, sharp bursts. Across the circle, Viktor stood rigid, arms outstretched, chanting in a guttural dialect she didn't recognize. Sweat glistened on his brow, his jaw clenched so tight she feared his teeth might crack. The ritual was unraveling, or perhaps it was working too well. The formula had promised transmutation, not of base metals into gold, but of grief into peace. A myth, she'd thought, a dangerous fantasy, yet now the magic was pulling at something deeper than matter. It was pulling at memory. A low hum rose from the circle, building into a dissonant wail. Hermione's chest tightened. She saw it then, not with her eyes, but in her mind, the great hall after the battle. The bodies, Fred's face still smiling in death, Lupin and Tonks, hand in hand, her own scream lost among 1,000 others. She gasped, pressing harder against the runes. "Viktor, stop. It's dredging up too much. We didn't account for the emotional resonance." He didn't answer. His voice grew louder, raw with strain. His knees trembled. And then she saw it in him, flashes of Durmstrang's frozen courtyards, of his father's cold disapproval, of the moment he'd pulled her from the Black Lake, her lips blue, her pulse faint. But beneath that, a memory she hadn't known. Viktor, younger, standing over a grave in a snow-covered field, a small handprint on the wooden marker, a child's name. "Viktor," she pleaded, "this isn't transmutation, it's exhumation. You can't alchemize away pain by reliving it." The circle flared. A crack split the stone between them, spitting sparks. The air warped, and suddenly she wasn't in the cavern anymore. She was in her parents' living room in Australia, watching them sip tea, blank-eyed, unaware of whom she was. The guilt crashed over her like a wave. The life she'd stolen from them, the years she couldn't get back. She screamed, clawing at the floor, but the vision held her. On the other side, Viktor fell to one knee. Blood trickled from his nose. "A vest trying to make it mean something," he gasped. "The pain, the lost, if it could be turned into strength. It doesn't work like that." Hermione sobbed, dragging herself forward, inch by inch, against the pull of memory. "You don't transmute grief by drowning in it. You carry it. You live with it. You let it change you, but not destroy you." The circle flickered. The green light dimmed, then surged again, as if the magic itself resisted surrender. Stones groaned overhead. Dust rained from the ceiling. With a final ragged breath, Hermione slammed her palm into the central rune. "Finite incantatum," she whispered, then shouted it, pouring every ounce of will into the words. "Finite, finite, finite." The circle shattered. A shockwave threw her backward. Viktor was flung aside like a rag doll, landing hard against the wall. Silence followed, deep, ringing, absolute. Hermione lay on her side, trembling, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. Slowly she pushed herself up. Viktor stirred, groaning, one hand pressed to his ribs. She crawled to him. "Viktor." He looked at her, eyes glassy with pain, and something else, relief, maybe, or understanding. "It was not a formula for healing," he said hoarsely. "It was a mirror." She nodded, gripping his hand. "And some truths don't need to be changed. They just need to be seen." Outside, the first light of dawn crept through the mountain pass, pale gold bleeding into the dark. Snow fell in slow spirals through the fractured roof of the chamber, each flake catching the pale blue light that pulsed from the alchemical array etched into the stone floor. Hermione knelt at its edge, breath shallow, fingers tracing the ancient runes that shimmered like veins of silver beneath ice. The air hummed with a frequency that made her teeth ache, a resonance that felt less like magic and more like memory, raw, unspooled, pressing against her skull. "It was not meant to create," Viktor said, his voice low, steady. He stood just behind her, his cloak dusted with frost, his face shadowed by grief. "It was meant to preserve." She turned to look at him, really look. In the shifting glow, she saw not the famed seeker or the stoic Bulgarian champion, but a man who had carried silence for too long. His eyes held the weight of centuries, not just his own, but those of the monks who had guarded this place, who had inscribed their sorrow into stone and spell. "They tried to save her," he said. "His wife, the alchemist. When she fell ill, consumed by a curse no healer could name, they turned to forbidden arts. Not to cheat death, but to delay it, to keep her soul tethered even as her body failed." Hermione's breath caught. The formula wasn't about power. It wasn't about immortality in the grotesque sense Voldemort had sought. It was love, desperate, broken, beautiful love. "And it worked?" she whispered, for a time. Viktor stepped forward, placing a hand on the central sigil. The light flared, and for a moment a woman's voice sighed through the chamber, wordless, aching. He bound her essence to the mountain's heart. But magic that defies natural law, it festers, it warps. She did not rest. She could not move on. "And he became the guardian," Hermione finished, understanding dawning like cold fired. "He never left. He let the mountain take him. His body, his soul, they merged with the runes. He's part of the spell now." A gust swept through the chamber, stirring the ash that lined the far wall. From it, a shape began to form, hazy, translucent. A man in tattered robes, his eyes hollow with centuries of waiting, his hands outstretched not in threat but in plea. Viktor did not flinch. "You have lived long enough," he said in Bulgarian. The ghost stilled. "She is gone. She has been at peace. You must let go." The air trembled. The runes flared crimson, then dimmed. The ghost reached for an invisible thread, tugging at nothing, yet Hermione felt the strain in her chest, as if her own heart were caught in the pull. "It's still bowed," she said, scrambling to her notes. "The formula, it's incomplete. The final step wasn't release, it was severance. He never wrote it, he couldn't." Viktor looked at her. "You can? I think so." Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. "The counter rune. It's in the margins. A single phrase, almost erased. 'Let love be enough though it ends,'" she began to chant, voice rising above the groan of the mountain. The stone beneath them shuddered. The ghost wailed, a sound of release, not pain. One by one the runes faded, their light sinking into the earth, like stars falling below the horizon. When it was over, silence returned. The snow fell gently. The chamber was cold, but no longer alive. Viktor exhaled, long and slow. "It is done." Hermione sat back, tears freezing on her cheeks. All this time, they weren't trying to make something eternal. They just didn't want to say goodbye. He reached for her hand, calloused and warm. "And yet," he said in holding on, "he lost her twice." She leaned into his shoulder, the weight of revelation pressing down but not crushing. Outside, the wind eased. The storm had passed. Somewhere deep below, a heart that had beat for centuries finally stopped. And in the quiet, something like peace took its place. The air outside the cavern mouth tasted different, cleaner, sharper, as if the storm had scoured the world down to its bones. Hermione stepped forward, her boots crunching on frost-laced stone, and drew in a long, shuddering breath. The wind still carried the scent of ozone and damp earth, but beneath it, something quieter. Pine resin, snowmelt, life. She turned to look at Viktor, who stood just behind her, his face shadowed beneath the hood of his cloak. His jaw was tight, one hand pressed lightly against the bandages, wound around his ribs, but his eyes, dark, steady, met hers with a quiet recognition. "We made it," she thought, though the words wouldn't come. Not just from the cavern, from everything. The sky above had cleared after hours of fury, lightning splitting the peaks like cracks in glass, thunder, shaking the mountain's spine. Inside the cave they'd face more than collapsing tunnels and ancient wards. They'd face the echoes of choices long buried, Hermione's guilt over spells she'd cast in war, Viktor's grief for the brother he'd lost too young, the weight of names they'd both tried to outrun. The alchemical formula had shown them, not in words but in visions, what it demanded. Not knowledge, sacrifice, and yet they hadn't used it. The scroll still rested in Hermione's inner pocket, sealed now with a charm of her own design, bound in silence. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat beneath cloth. She could still see the symbols glowing in the dark, silver ink shifting like liquid mercury, whispering promises of resurrection, transfiguration, a world reborn from ash. But the cost had been blood. Not theirs, innocent blood. A life offered freely, torn from the living. "I still hear the voice," Viktor said finally, his voice low, rough from smoke and cold. "In the dark. It speaks in Bulgarian. My grandmother's lullaby, then it twists, becomes something else." Hermione nodded. She'd heard it too, her mother's voice, calling her home, then shifting into Bellatrix Lestrange's laugh. The formula didn't just show truth, it weaponized memory. "We did the right thing," she said, more to convince herself than him. Some secrets should stay buried. Viktor looked at her, then reached into his coat. He pulled out a small vial, cloudy with residue, what remained of the elixir they'd brewed from the lesser ingredients, the ones that only healed. He held it up. This at least has purpose. She remembered the wound on his side, the fever that had set in after the fall. The elixir had mended flesh, cooled fire in the blood. Not magic without cost, but magic with balance. "Yes," she said softly. "This we keep." Behind them the mountain groaned, a deep tectonic shift. The entrance to the cavern collapsed in on itself with a muffled roar, sealing the chamber shut beneath tons of ice and stone. No one would find it again. Not for centuries. Perhaps never. They stood in silence as the snow began to fall again, gentle now, dusting their cloaks and hair with white. Hermione pulled her gloves tighter, her fingers still stiff from cold. She thought of Hogwarts, of the library, of tea with steam curling into quiet air. She thought of Ron, his laugh, his stubborn warmth, and how far she'd drifted from that life. Not lost, just changed. Viktor shifted beside her, and for a moment their shoulders touched, a small thing. But it grounded her. "You return to Hogwarts?" he asked. "In a few days. There's still research to do, records to amend, lies to correct." He nodded. "And I go home, to the village. There is a school, small but proud. They need a professor of defense. I think I am ready." She smiled, faint but real. "You'll be brilliant." He looked at her then, really looked, his gaze lingering on the smudge of dirt across her cheek, the tiredness in her eyes, the quiet strength that had carried her through fire and shadow. "You, Hermione Granger," he said slowly, "are the most stubborn woman I have ever known." She laughed, short, surprised, and the sound rang clear in the mountain air. "And you," she said, "are the most infuriatingly calm man I've ever met." He grinned, just slightly, and for the first time in years it reached his eyes. They began the descent together, step by careful step, into the valley below, where the world waited, whole, wounded, but breathing. And for now, that was enough. Rain tapped gently against the window panes of the small cottage nestled in the hills above Sofia, a steady rhythm that had become familiar over the past fortnight. Inside, Hermione sat by the fire, a worn journal open in her lap, her fingers tracing the alchemical symbols they had copied from the monastery's hidden vault. The ink shimmered faintly under the candlelight, as if reluctant to be read. She exhaled slowly, watching the flames dance, their warmth barely reaching her cold hands. A floorboard creaked behind her, and then Viktor was there, handing her a steaming cup of tea. He didn't say anything at first, just stood by the mantel, his silhouette broad against the flickering orange light. His face was more weathered than it had been years ago, lines carved by wind and war and solitude, but his eyes, dark, steady, still held that quiet intensity she remembered from their earliest meetings. "Still can't sleep?" he asked, his voice low, accented. She shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes I see the chamber, the way the formula glowed, like it was alive." Viktor nodded as if he too carried the image behind his eyelids. "It is not just magic. It is memory, the kind that breathes." They had left the monastery under cover of dusk, the secret formula sealed in a lead-lined case enchanted with every ward they knew. But knowledge, once awakened, could not be entirely contained. Even now whispers traveled, through ministry corridors, through underground circles hungry for power. The Order had sent word. Star. They know something was taken. Star. Hermione turned a page in the journal. "Do you think we did the right thing, keeping it hidden?" Viktor walked to the window, watching the rain blur the distant peaks. "If we had given it to the ministry, they would have tried to use it, or destroy it out of fear. Neither option honors what it is." "What star is starred, Viktor? Truly?" He turned to her. "Not a weapon, not a cure. It is balance. The kind that existed before men tried to tip the scales. The alchemists weren't trying to make gold or immortality. They were trying to remember how to live star with star magic, not above it." She closed the journal, pressing her palm flat against its cover. "And now we're the keepers of that memory. For now," he said softly. "Until it is safe to share, or until we are no longer needed." A silence settled between them, not heavy, but full, like the space before a storm breaks. Outside the rain eased. Somewhere in the valley, an owl called. Hermione stood moving to the hearth. She stirred the embers with the iron rod, sending up a shower of sparks. "I keep thinking about Harry, about Ron. If they knew what we'd found, would they understand why we didn't tell them?" Viktor stepped beside her. "You protect them by staying silent, just as you always have." She looked up at him, surprised by the tenderness in his voice. "And what about you? Who protects Star, you Star?" He smiled, just slightly. "Perhaps I am protecting myself, but I am not alone anymore." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small vial, clear liquid swirling with threads of silver and deep violet. The distilled essence of the formula, reduced to a single drop. They had tested it once, just once, in a moonlit grove. No explosion, no transformation. Just a moment of perfect stillness, where the forest seemed to breathe in unison with them. "We'll go back to England soon," she said. "Face the inquiries, Explain what we can. And what about this? He nodded toward the vial. We keep it safe, and we keep learning. Until we understand not just star how star it works, but star why star it chose us. Viktor took her hand, his grip warm and sure. Then we face that too, together. Snow fell in soft, silent flurries over the high ridge of the Balkan mountains, dusting the stone ruins like powdered starlight. Hermione stood at the edge of the ancient terrace, her breath curling in pale wisps before her. The wind carried the scent of pine and cold earth, and somewhere below, a stream carved its way through the ice-laced rocks. She pulled her cloak tighter, fingers brushing the worn leather satchel at her side, the one that had carried the fragments of the formula, the weight of centuries. And now, emptiness. Not true emptiness, though, not anymore. Behind her, the heavy wooden door of the restored monastery chapel creaked open, and a shadow fell across the frost-laced stones. Viktor stepped out, his boots crunching lightly in the snow. He carried 2 steaming mugs, the warmth rising in delicate spirals. Without a word, he offered one to her. She took it, their fingers grazing. Brief, warm, familiar. "Chai," he said, voice low, "with cinnamon." "Just how you like," she smiled, wrapping both hands around the mug. "You remembered." "I remember many things," he said, and there was a quiet depth in his voice, like the hush between heartbeats. They stood together in silence, watching the sun dip behind the distant peaks, staining the snow in hues of rose and gold. The alchemical formula, once so coveted, so dangerous, was gone. Not destroyed, not hidden, but star-transformed star. They had rewritten its purpose, channeling its power, not into resurrection or immortality, but into restoration. The monastery's enchantments, long frayed by time, now hummed with renewed strength. The land, starved of magic for generations, had begun to breathe again. And so had they. Hermione sipped her tea, the warmth spreading through her chest. "Do you think they'll come back? The monks?" "In time," Viktor said. "They will feel the change. Magic calls to those who listen." She nodded. It had taken weeks to decode the final incantation, months to understand the true cost of alchemy, not in gold or blood, but in intent. The formula had never been meant to conquer death. It was a mirror, reflecting the desires of the one who wielded it. In the wrong hands, it would have unraveled the world. In theirs, it had woven something new. She turned to look at him. Snow had caught in his dark hair, and his eyes, so much softer now than she remembered from their school days, held hers with steady calm. "We did it," she said, not quite a question. "We did," he agreed. "But it was never just about the formula, was it?" No, it hadn't been. It had been about the nights spent translating crumbling scrolls by firelight, his quiet patience, when her frustration boiled over. It had been the way he'd stood between her and the mountain drake without hesitation, wand raised, voice steady. It had been the mornings when they'd found each other already awake, watching the sunrise in companionable silence, 2 souls learning how to trust again. She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. His palm was calloused, warm, alive. "I don't want to go back to how it was," she admitted. "To just letters, to distance." He turned his hand, squeezing hers gently. "Then don't." "I mean," she hesitated. "I mean I want to stay. Not here, perhaps, but near. With you, if you'll have me." Viktor smiled, slow and sure, like dawn breaking over the peaks. He lifted her hand, brushing his lips across her knuckles. "I have waited many years," he said. "But not for this. For you, I would wait longer. But I do not think I must." A laugh bubbled up in her throat, light and unexpected. Snowflakes caught in her lashes, and she leaned into him, shoulder to shoulder, heart to heart. Below, the valley stirred. A fox darted through the trees. A bird called. The world, remade, moved forward, and so would they.